On September 11th, 2001, a day forever etched in American memory, the nation faced an unprecedented tragedy that reshaped the world's course. While the images of the Twin Towers collapsing remain iconic and haunting, another life quietly slipped away amid the chaos, overshadowed by the scale of the disaster. This is the story of Lawrence Larry Holmes, a man whose passing went largely unnoticed, buried beneath the weight of a national catastrophe. Yet, his story embodies the countless personal tragedies that unfold unnoticed in the shadows of history's most devastating events. Larry Holmes was 48 years old when his life ended unexpectedly. His background was complex, marked by both moments of achievement and periods of struggle. Born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, Larry grew up amidst hardship in one of the city's toughest neighborhoods, where crime was common and opportunities scarce. He was not a criminal, but his youth was marred by petty offenses, small thefts, and street-smart hustles born out of necessity to survive in a tough environment. Despite these early struggles, Larry harbored ambitions for a better future. He dedicated himself to construction work, laboring tirelessly to build something lasting, something more than temporary fixes. His hands bore scars from years of hard labor, yet they also earned him a reputation for reliability. Though he was not a master craftsman, Larry was dependable, showing up every day and working harder than many of the younger workers. Like many in Newark, he faced his inner demons, but he was determined to forge a better life for himself and his family. Larry's wife, Evelyn, was his greatest support, and their son, Devon, was his pride and joy. At 15, Devon was the reason Larry pushed himself through long hours and tough days. Whenever he felt like giving up, he remembered them, his motivation to keep striving for a brighter future. Their love and their dreams kept him grounded, reminding him of what was truly worth fighting for. On that ordinary morning, Larry woke early, kissed Evelyn goodbye, and promised Devon he would return home in time for dinner. He had a small project, a residential remodel in Manhattan, that he was eager to tackle. He appreciated the challenge, knowing it would be demanding but rewarding. As he headed into the city, the air was crisp, hinting at the approaching fall, and the streets buzzed with their usual energy, people rushing to work, cars honking in traffic. Larry arrived at the job site around 8:30, unaware that this day would be unlike any other. This story underscores how, amid national tragedy, countless personal stories of perseverance and loss quietly unfold. Larry Holmes's life was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, individual struggles continue beyond the headlines, shaping the fabric of everyday life. Earlier than expected, Larry arrived at the work site, a man known for punctuality and dedication. He greeted the foreman, Tony, and checked in with the crew, all focused on their task. The house they were renovating sat in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood that had recently undergone gentrification, and its owners were eager to sell. Larry didn't think much of it, just another project to complete. As he prepared to start, his phone rang. It was Evelyn. Her tone was calm, but carried an undercurrent of concern. Turning on the television, Larry sensed something was wrong. He watched as the screen showed footage of a plane striking the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Smoke billowed from the skyscraper, darkening the sky above it. Confused and shaken, he muttered, "What's happening?" Evelyn's voice was faint in the background, but his attention was fixed on the unfolding scene. Unbeknownst to him, a second plane had already hit the South Tower. News anchors scrambled to interpret the chaos, hijackings, terror, and attack on the city. It all felt like a nightmare, surreal and impossible to believe. Larry couldn't look away from the screen, his heart pounding as the reality sank in. The others on the crew gathered around, equally stunned, watching the city's familiar skyline turn into chaos. Despite the distance from the towers, Larry understood the danger was spreading. His wife was waiting at home, his son at school, and he had no way of knowing if they were safe. Communications were down. Calls to Evelyn and his son went unanswered. All he could do was wait, just like everyone else. Soon the first tower collapsed, then the second, their destruction echoing through the city. The sound of the buildings falling haunted Larry, like the world itself was crumbling. He turned to Tony, voice steady but urgent. "We need to get out of here." Tony looked uncertain. "You're right, but where can we go? The subways are shut, the streets are crowded." Larry made a decision. "I'm heading home." He was halfway down Fifth Avenue when chaos erupted. Two young men suddenly stepped out from an alley, catching him off guard. His mind was still preoccupied with the tower's fall, and he hadn't seen them approaching. In that moment, everything changed, and Larry faced a new, unpredictable threat amid the city's crumbling chaos. As he approached, one of the assailants suddenly shoved him forcefully, causing him to stumble backward. The attacker demanded, "Give us your wallet," his voice edged with urgency. Larry's instincts kicked in. He was no fighter, but he refused to surrender everything without resistance. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet, yet in that moment, he felt a sharp object pressed against his side, a knife. Before Larry could fully grasp what was happening, the blade pierced his flesh, delivering an excruciating pain that stunned him briefly before igniting through his body like fire. He staggered backward, clutching his stomach in an attempt to stem the bleeding, but the attackers moved swiftly and with practiced ease. They snatched his wallet and pushed him to the ground. The last thing Larry saw was the hunger, desperation, and a flicker of anger in their eyes. Without hesitation, the two men disappeared into the crowd, leaving Larry sprawled on the sidewalk, blood pooling around him. He tried to scream, but his voice was drowned out by sirens and shouting. Footsteps approached, yet they came too late to save him. His vision blurred as coldness seeped over him, and the world around him faded into darkness. When the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. Larry Holmes had passed away. The subsequent investigation was swift, but the case quickly went cold. Witnesses who had seen Larry that day were too overwhelmed to offer useful details, and no suspects emerged. His death was overshadowed by the day's tragic events, and Evelyn never learned who was responsible. She raised Devon alone, but the pain of that day lingered. Often she would stand by the window, gazing out, hoping for Larry's return, but he never came. On that same day, as the world mourned countless lives lost, Larry's life was taken just as suddenly and violently. His name would never be spoken alongside the victims of the attacks on the Twin Towers. Yet for Evelyn and Devon, his absence created an unfillable void. The days following Larry's death were marked by an oppressive silence as the nation struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy. Meanwhile, families elsewhere in the city faced their own personal losses, which seemed insignificant compared to the terror unfolding in Manhattan, but were no less painful for Evelyn. The silence was almost suffocating. On the day Larry was murdered, she had been at home, glued to the television as chaos erupted in the city. The phone lines were jammed and she couldn't reach him. She watched in frantic despair as images of destruction and confusion filled the screen, all the while holding on to the hope that Larry was out there somewhere, trying to find his way back to her and their son. Several hours after the initial shock of the terrorist attacks had begun to fade into a numb disbelief, a police officer, someone she had never met before, gently informed Evelyn that her husband had been discovered on a Brooklyn street, stabbed and abandoned. He explained that Larry's wallet had been stolen during what appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. The news struck Evelyn as surreal. She was unprepared for such a devastating revelation. The events of that day already felt like an endless nightmare, and the thought that Larry had been taken from her in such a senseless act was almost too much to bear. She struggled to comprehend how, in a world already unraveling, her beloved could be lost in such a brutal, unprovoked manner. Larry had always been her protector and partner, and now he was gone, leaving her to face a world turned upside down. The funeral arrangements blurred together in her mind, the details fading into a haze, though she knew her family tried to support her in their own way. Despite the presence of loved ones around her, nothing seemed to matter. She kept searching for Larry in every corner of their home, expecting him to walk through the door at any moment. She longed to see him emerge from the garage, where he often tinkered with his tools and unwound after long days, but he never came. The house felt hollow without him, even though his presence lingered in every quiet corner. Their 15-year-old son, Devon, mourned more deeply than Evelyn could have anticipated. Old enough to grasp that his father was gone, yet too young to process the loss in a healthy way, he withdrew from his friends. His grades declined, and he spent most of his time locked away in his room, listening to music that reminded him of Larry, classic rock songs Larry had played repeatedly on the radio. It was as if Devon was trying to hold on to his father's memory, clinging to some fragment of him that hadn't been stolen away. Still, nothing could fill the void left behind. The emptiness in their lives was overwhelming. Evelyn tried to stay strong for Devon, but often found herself quietly crying at night, missing Larry's voice and the warmth of his embrace. They had built a life together, and now everything seemed to be crumbling. In the months that followed, their grief was compounded by unanswered questions. The police investigation into Larry's death was a minor detail amid the chaos of September 11th. No one seemed to care much about the man who had been murdered for his wallet on a Brooklyn street. The detectives assigned to the case were overwhelmed by the aftermath of the attacks, and despite filing a report, there was little urgency to find those responsible. The two men who had taken Larry's life were never located, and the city remained silent on the matter. In the aftermath of the devastating attacks, Evelyn was still reeling from her own personal tragedy, the loss of her husband Larry. His passing, though tragic, seemed like just another sorrow in a city already overwhelmed by grief. The investigation into Larry's death yielded no new clues. Witnesses who might have remembered the final moments were too shaken to recall details, too absorbed in their own struggles to notice what had transpired. The perpetrators had long since vanished into the chaos, leaving the case unresolved and filed away as yet another unsolved mystery. For Evelyn, this absence of justice was a wound that refused to heal, fueling a persistent sense of injustice. She often wondered if things might have been different had Larry's death occurred on a different day, under less tragic circumstances. Perhaps if the nation hadn't been consumed by the horrors of that period, someone might have noticed something, cared enough to pursue the truth. But Larry's death, like so many others that day, was swallowed by the overwhelming weight of national tragedy. Sometimes Evelyn would look at her son Devon and see the same confusion and sorrow reflected in his eyes that she felt every day. Their shared grief bonded them, yet it also created a distance they couldn't bridge. Evelyn had lost her partner, the man who had been her anchor, and Devon had lost his father, a man who had taught him resilience, hard work, and dignity. Both were mourning, but their ways of coping diverged, tearing at their relationship. Over the years, Evelyn struggled to move forward, but Larry's absence always loomed over her like a shadow. She sought solace in therapy, support groups, and faith, but nothing seemed to ease the ache. The memory of Larry, who had dedicated himself to building a better life for his family, remained vivid, especially whenever she passed the place where he had been taken from her. The sense of injustice surged anew each time. As Devon grew older, he found his own methods of dealing with the loss. He took on odd jobs, saving to attend college, yet his relationship with his mother grew strained. He resented her inability to fully understand his grief, and he struggled to express his anger at the world, at those responsible, and at the indifference that seemed to surround them. He became more withdrawn, spending less time at home, trying to forget the pain. Still, neither of them could escape the deep ache that marked their lives. Every anniversary of Larry's death felt like reopening an old wound, a reminder that time had moved forward without him. The world had carried on from that tragic day, but for Evelyn and Devon, September 11th remained a day of profound personal loss, an event that forever altered their lives and their sense of security. The tragedy that befell the nation was profound, yet what was truly lost went far beyond the immediate chaos. It was the intangible toll on individuals that often went unnoticed. The devastation caused by the terrorist attacks was measurable in lives lost and buildings destroyed, but the personal void left behind was immeasurable and quietly endured. Among these silent stories was that of Larry Holmes, whose passing represented a small but significant chapter in a much larger narrative of grief. For his family, however, it was everything. In the years that followed Larry's death, an unshakable sense of emptiness persisted, casting a shadow over Evelyn and Devon's lives. They struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy amid the wreckage of their loss, yet Larry's absence was impossible to ignore. His presence lingered in every corner of their days, a constant reminder of what had been taken from them. Despite the world moving forward after September 11th, their grief remained a heavy burden, never fully lifting. They learned to carry it, to live alongside it, but the weight of their sorrow never truly lessened. Eventually, Evelyn decided to leave their old home, the place where she and Larry had shared their life. As time passed, it became increasingly difficult to remain in a house filled with memories of his laughter, his warmth, his presence. She moved into a modest apartment in a quieter neighborhood, seeking peace away from the city's chaos. Yet even in solitude, she often found herself waiting for Larry to return, as if the years had never passed. The world outside had changed dramatically, but for her, time seemed to stand still. Devon, too, had undergone transformation. He had grown into a young man, graduated from high school, and found work as a mechanic. It was not the life he had envisioned, but it was his own. He had begun to forge a path, living independently in a small city apartment. Still, the pain of losing his father remained ever present. His anger simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the man who had been his hero. His relationship with his mother remained distant, as if they were strangers bound by blood but separated by grief. As the years slipped by, the question of Larry's murder gradually faded into the background. The police had never reopened the case, and no new leads emerged. His death, occurring amidst a city still reeling from the largest act of terror in recent history, was quickly overshadowed by the country's collective trauma. No memorials or vigils honored Larry Holmes. His story was swallowed by the larger narrative of national loss. Yet Evelyn refused to let go of her search for answers. She would visit the Brooklyn precinct, asking about any developments, knowing deep down that closure was unlikely. She would sit in the waiting room, gazing at faded photographs, clinging to the hope that someday, perhaps, the truth would surface. Despite the relentless efforts of investigators, the police station walls bore only silent hopes for a breakthrough that might deliver justice for Larry. Overwhelmed by the enormity of the attacks and their aftermath, the detectives had long since shifted their focus to more urgent cases, leaving Larry's murder as a minor note in a much larger narrative. His death, though deeply tragic, was overshadowed by the scale of that day's chaos. It wasn't until years later, as Evelyn prepared to sell her apartment, that she rediscovered a fragment of her past that reignited her resolve. While sorting through old belongings in the attic, items she had never been able to part with, she uncovered photographs of Larry, including their wedding, family trips, and moments from their son's childhood. At the bottom of a shoebox, she found something that froze her in place, an old police report from the day Larry was attacked. Initially, she thought she had seen it before, but as she examined the document more carefully, she noticed a detail she had previously overlooked. Among the sparse witness statements, one name stood out, a potential lead. The report described a young woman who had seen two men fleeing the alley where Larry was assaulted. Her description of the suspects was vague, but she did mention a distinctive feature, a tattoo on one of the men's arms. Evelyn's heart quickened as she reread the report. It was the first promising clue in years, the first sign that someone might hold knowledge about what truly happened. She immediately reached out to the detective's office, clinging to the hope that someone involved might remember something. The officer who answered was kind but cautious. The case had been closed years earlier, and the lead had long gone cold. Still, he agreed to look into it. Weeks passed, and Evelyn held her breath, waiting for any news. The investigation had been abandoned, and the trail had gone cold. Yet that small spark of hope kept her going. She couldn't shake the feeling that her husband's killer was still out there, living unpunished while she and Devon endured their silent grief. The thought that someone might have seen or known something kept her awake at night. Finally, the call came. The witness was alive and living in a small town in upstate New York. Though she had moved on with her life, she remembered the night Larry was attacked. She could now provide a more detailed description of the tattoo, matching the markings of a known gang member in the area. This was a breakthrough, yet only the beginning of a new chapter. Evelyn and the detective continued their work together, determined to uncover the truth and bring closure to Larry's case. Over several months, investigators painstakingly reconstructed a case long buried in obscurity. Their efforts revealed that one of Larry's killers was affiliated with a minor gang involved in petty thefts and street-level crimes. This lead eventually pointed to a suspect named Marcus Slick Carter, a man with a lengthy history of violence. After his arrest and charges for Larry's death, gathering solid evidence proved challenging, making the process slow and meticulous. Yet after years of silence, the case was finally reopened. Watching Marcus Carter receive his sentence in court, Evelyn experienced a profound sense of closure, something she had long thought impossible. The years of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and grief were finally addressed. Although Larry's loss remained tragic, it no longer felt like an unresolved mystery. This small victory brought Evelyn the peace she had sought for so long. Even with the perpetrator behind bars, the emotional scars endured. The pain of losing Larry and witnessing her son grow up without a father would never fully fade. Nonetheless, in that moment, Evelyn understood that Larry had received the justice he deserved, even if it had taken years to achieve. It was a bittersweet triumph, yet the only solace she could hold on to. Larry Holmes might have been one of many victims in a world riddled with tragedy, but for Evelyn and Devon, his memory and legacy remained alive. They continued to carry the weight of that fateful day in the years that followed, keeping his spirit alive through their ongoing lives. Meanwhile, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, just hours before the devastating attacks that would alter history forever, a different tragedy was quietly unfolding in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. While the world's attention was fixed on the destruction in New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, a dark story of betrayal, greed, and violence was gradually emerging beneath the surface of everyday life. That day marked the tragic and premature end of 38-year-old David Martinez's life. A well-known figure within Philadelphia's close-knit Spanish-speaking community, David was born and raised in the city. Known for his charm, generosity, and ambition to improve his family's circumstances, he had grown up in a working-class neighborhood as the son of Mexican immigrants who worked tirelessly to support him and his siblings. David had always aspired to do more than what his modest means allowed. Determined to escape the cycle of poverty that had ensnared many before him, he managed to build a small but successful auto repair shop on the city's outskirts. His business was recognized for its quality service and dedication, reflecting his hard work and dreams of a better future. David had built a reputation for honest, diligent work, earning a loyal clientele that repeatedly entrusted him with their vehicles. His belief in hard effort allowed him to expand his enterprise from humble beginnings into a thriving business. Yet, as his success grew, so did the pressures, financial burdens, personal ambitions, and unforeseen entanglements in criminal activities he had never anticipated. While many respected David's achievements, his rising prominence also attracted the attention of those seeking to exploit his wealth. Among them was Jorge Rivera, a former friend from his youth who had fallen into difficult circumstances. Growing up in the same neighborhood, David and Jorge shared similar struggles, but their lives diverged after high school. David worked tirelessly to establish stability, whereas Jorge succumbed to addiction, crime, and shady dealings. Jorge had approached David multiple times with dubious business ideas, often bordering on illegality, which David consistently refused, valuing his integrity and lawful pursuits. Despite this, Jorge's desperation grew, fueled by jealousy and a sense of betrayal, believing David had abandoned their shared past for a cleaner life. His resentment festered, and he saw David's success as a missed opportunity he could never reclaim. On September the 11th, Jorge made a final reckless attempt to persuade David into participating in a risky car theft scheme. He promised that the plan would bring them wealth, but David, already wary of Jorge's increasingly erratic behavior, declined once more. He explained that he had worked too hard to jeopardize everything for a quick, dangerous gain. Refusing to accept rejection, Jorge's frustration turned into rage. Unable to bear the thought of losing David as an ally, he decided to punish him for his perceived arrogance. His plan was to strip David of his business, his future, and his dreams. Around 10:30 in the morning, Jorge's destructive intent was set in motion, driven by betrayal and greed. Amidst the nation's ongoing focus on the initial reports of the World Trade Center attack, Jorge arrived unexpectedly at David's auto repair shop, armed with a handgun. His intent was to confront David one last time and force him to join his illicit enterprise. When David refused, Jorge's anger erupted and tensions quickly escalated. The two men engaged in a fierce argument within the garage, their voices rising above the noise of engines and the hum of fluorescent lights. Jorge accused David of abandoning their shared past and of becoming too respectable for him and his friends. Attempting to reason, David explained he was simply trying to earn an honest living and urged Jorge to do the same. However, consumed by jealousy and bitterness, Jorge's rage overtook him. Drawing his gun from his jacket, he fired twice, once into David's chest and once into his abdomen. David collapsed instantly onto the cold concrete floor. Jorge paused briefly, gazing down at his former close friend, the weight of his actions sinking in. Realizing that he had just ended a life and sealed his own future, Jorge chose not to seek help or surrender. Instead, he fled the scene, leaving David to lie alone in the quiet of the garage. It was only later that day, when David's employees arrived for their shifts, that the crime was discovered. By then, news of the terrorist attacks in New York had already dominated the media. As reports of a shooting in the city emerged, the connection was made. Police responded swiftly, but the investigation proved complex. Evidence confirmed David had been shot, with no signs of forced entry or theft. The shop's quiet location meant few witnesses. Those nearby had not heard the gunfire. For several days, authorities focused on the broader security crisis unfolding across the country. Weeks later, during a routine traffic stop in a neighboring city, Jorge was detained. As the investigation progressed, details of the shooting surfaced. Initially denying involvement, Jorge eventually confessed to killing David in a moment of rage after his repeated attempts to persuade him to join the criminal enterprise were rejected. He explained he had been desperate for money, and David's refusal pushed him over the edge. Jorge faced charges of first-degree murder and armed robbery, especially after authorities found stolen valuables from the garage amidst the chaos. The subsequent trial was a somber event, marked by heartfelt testimonies from David's family and friends, who mourned the loss of a man whose life was tragically cut short. The dedicated and diligent man he once was faced a tragic end that, although overshadowed by the events of 9/11, remained profoundly sorrowful. The city of Philadelphia mourned the loss of a man who had strived tirelessly to build a better future for his loved ones, only to have his life cut short by betrayal from someone he once considered a friend. For years after the trial, authorities continued their investigation into the motives behind the crime and the possible links between Jorge and other criminal elements in the area. Yet, for David's family, true closure was elusive. His death, occurring just hours before the nation endured its most devastating attack, became a personal tragedy lost amid the chaos that forever altered the world. Within his family, David's passing was an unspoken grief, compounded by the overwhelming trauma of 9/11. His mother, Rosa, carried the pain both publicly and privately, her sorrow overshadowed by the larger tragedy, yet she could not escape the vivid memory of her son's lifeless form lying on the garage floor, a haunting image that persisted despite the passing years. In quiet moments of mourning, Rosa would still see David's face in her dreams, a proud, determined young man who had promised to forge a better life. His loss was deeply felt by his younger sister, Isabella, who had been his closest confidant and source of advice during uncertain times. Together, they had faced the hardships of their youth in Philadelphia, sharing hopes and struggles. Isabella had watched David grow from a boy with big dreams into a responsible man of business, but his sudden death shattered her world. The long journey towards healing remained incomplete. She harbored anger at Jorg, at the senselessness of it all, and perhaps most painfully, at herself for not being able to prevent his decision. David's 5-year-old son, Alex, never truly knew his father, raised by his mother and grandparents. As he grew older, he began asking questions, trying to piece together the fragments of David's life. His mother, Rosa, shared stories of his father's hard-working spirit and aspirations to provide a better future. But for Alex, the loss was an abstract concept he struggled to understand fully. During adolescence, feelings of resentment grew. He wondered why a man who had never harmed anyone and only sought to support his family was taken away so suddenly. The question of why someone like David was lost remained unanswered, leaving Alex with a sense of injustice and longing for understanding. She did her best to shield Alex from the harsh truth about his father's death, but the questions persisted relentlessly. She longed to protect him from the brutal reality that his father's life had been taken in a violent act, an event that forever altered their family. Yet she understood that someday he would need to know the full story. When that moment arrived, she would have to explain that David's life had been ended by someone he once called a friend, an individual driven by jealousy and greed, so intense that he was willing to commit such an act over something as trivial as money. For now, Alex tried to push aside feelings of anger and confusion, focusing instead on school, friends, and the world beyond their home. He had a bright future ahead, one that David had always envisioned for him. Still, the shadow of his father's absence loomed large, making each achievement, each milestone feel incomplete, as if something irreplaceable was missing. Over the years, the investigation into David's death grew increasingly complicated. Jorge, who had been detained shortly after the incident, was only the beginning. As authorities delved deeper into his life, they uncovered links to a broader network involved in organized crime. Items stolen from David's garage were connected to a series of car thefts plaguing the city for months. It became clear that Jorge hadn't acted alone. His desperation had led him to associate with dangerous criminal groups. Detectives soon realized Jorge was a small-time operator eager to rise in the criminal world, seeking bigger scores at any cost. The high-stakes car theft scheme he was pushing David to join was just part of a larger plan, one involving trafficking stolen vehicles across state lines. David's refusal to participate not only angered Jorge, but ultimately cost him his life. Although Jorge was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, it was evident that his role was only a fragment of a much larger picture. His ties to more influential criminal elements suggested that David's death was part of a wider pattern of illicit activity that had gone unnoticed for years. Investigators began to consider whether David had been targeted specifically because of his growing success in the auto repair business, or if he had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. As the case unfolded, it became apparent that Jorge viewed David as a threat to his ambitions. The killing, while deeply personal, also appeared to be a calculated move to eliminate a rival and access a share of David's profits. Further investigation revealed that Jorge had been attempting to exploit his connections within the criminal underworld, revealing layers of deception and greed behind the tragic event. In a neighborhood shadowed by the presence of known criminals, Jorge had meticulously planned to steal valuable car parts from David's shop, intending to sell them on the black market. When David refused to participate, Jorge perceived it as a betrayal, and his sense of grievance grew. The fact that David had once been his close friend made Jorge's act of violence all the more brutal in his eyes. His crime was the result of years of simmering resentment, envy, and greed, culminating in a tragic act of betrayal. However, David's murder was not an isolated incident. As authorities investigated further, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of violence and treachery within the local criminal circles, long ignored. It appeared that Jorge's desperation was part of a broader societal issue where individuals who once dreamed of a better life succumbed to the temptations of quick money and the perilous world of organized crime. By the time the trial commenced, the city was still reeling from the aftermath of September 11th. Yet David's family remained resolute in their pursuit of justice. They attended every day, listening to testimonies that revealed the chilling details of Jorge's premeditated crime. When Jorge was finally found guilty, the family experienced a mixture of relief and sorrow. Though justice was served, it felt insufficient. No verdict could restore David, and his loss was irreversible. In the years that followed, Rosa, Isabella, and Alex each grappled with their grief in their own way. They remembered David not only for the tragic way he had been taken, but also for the man he was, a loving father, a devoted son, and a diligent businessman who fought to build a better future for his loved ones. His death, though devastating, brought his family closer together. They promised to keep his memory alive, sharing stories that celebrated his life and the love they cherished. Though David's life was cut short too soon, his family held on to the hope that their love and memories would endure beyond his absence. Over time, the impact of his loss continued to ripple through their lives and the community. His auto repair shop, once bustling with activity, eventually closed after his passing. Rosa had struggled to keep it afloat, clinging to his legacy, but the emotional toll and the challenge of managing alone proved too great. The shop was sold, and the space that once echoed with the sounds of engines and repair work fell silent. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself gradually changed. Gentrification brought wealthier newcomers, transforming the area's character and shifting its dynamics. Although the physical place that held so many of David's memories disappeared, those who knew him found ways to honor his legacy. Isabella, now in her mid-30s, moved to a different part of the city, seeking distance from painful memories and a fresh start. Despite the passage of years, the love and memories they shared remained a vital part of their lives, a testament to the enduring bond of family and the lasting influence of a life cut short. After her brother's sudden and violent passing, college student and aspiring social worker Rosa dedicated herself to helping others and building a family of her own. Yet the shadow of David's death lingered over every choice she made. The anger she had harbored as a teenager never truly faded. It subtly shaped her approach to caring for families torn apart by hardship, mirroring her own loss. Despite pouring her energy into her career and personal life, a part of her remained trapped in that tragic moment when her brother was taken from her so abruptly. Meanwhile, Alex, now in his early 20s, viewed the past through a different lens. He was proud of the man his father, David, had been, and carried that pride into adulthood. Yet, over the years, a certain emotional distance grew. He consciously avoided idolizing his father, aware that the man who had been lost was imperfect. Still, the weight of that loss stayed with him as he navigated life, earning a college degree and finding work. Frequently, he wondered how David might have reacted to his choices or what advice he would have offered during difficult times, but no answers ever came. Instead, Alex found comfort in his mother Rosa's resilience. Despite overwhelming grief, she continued to support her family and rebuild her life, even when it seemed hope had been stripped away. Her quiet strength spoke volumes about the internal struggles she faced daily, and her love for her son was evident in every act, though a deep, lingering sorrow remained. In contrast, Jorge Rivera faced a bleak future after his conviction. Following a lengthy legal process, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The trial was a spectacle. The defense portrayed Jorge as a man driven to desperation by his own failures, while the prosecution emphasized the premeditated nature of his crime. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced accordingly. Even behind bars, Jorge's bitterness persisted. He occasionally spoke about David to fellow inmates, justifying his actions as those of a man wronged by circumstances. His explanations, however, were never accepted by those who knew the full story. His time in prison was marked by periods of introspection, but these rarely altered his hardened outlook. Most of his days were spent in isolation, not out of fear, but because he refused to associate with anyone who didn't share his perspective. His resentment toward David never fully faded, and in the years after the incident, Jorge clung to a narrative that cast him as a victim of circumstance, never admitting the true depth of his jealousy and bitterness. Instead of viewing himself as a victim of circumstances, he often rationalized his actions, yet deep inside he understood that his choices had not only shattered David's life, but also damaged his own reputation within the community. David's death became one of many tragic episodes of violence that marred Philadelphia during that period. However, The impact of his loss resonated particularly strongly within the local Spanish-speaking community, many of whom had known him personally. In the aftermath, numerous discussions emerged about the dangers of temptation and how easily individuals could fall prey to crime when faced with the lure of quick money. David represented the success story many immigrants aspire to, someone who had worked diligently to reach his goals and had achieved them by adhering to the rules. His murder served as a painful reminder that even those who walk the straight path are vulnerable to the darkness lurking nearby. Yet his story was not solely one of tragedy. It also embodied resilience. While his death left a permanent scar on his family, it also created a legacy that could never be erased. Rosa, Isabella, and Alex carried pieces of David within their lives, through their kindness, their work ethic, and the values he had instilled in them. Rosa often reflected on David's love for life, his passion for helping others, and his dreams of providing a better future for his family. These memories sustained her through the passing years, even as the world around her evolved. As months turned into years, Philadelphia itself gradually transformed. The scars of its violent past slowly faded and new opportunities arose. Yet, for those who knew David, the pain of his loss remained an indelible part of their stories. His brief life left an enduring mark on the city and its people, an imprint that could never be erased. In quiet moments and treasured memories, the legacy of David Martinez endured, a man who once dreamed of success and family, who worked tirelessly to achieve both. Though his life was cut short by senseless violence, his spirit and love for his loved ones continued to live on in the hearts of those who knew him, a testament to the enduring power of love and memory even amidst tragedy. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, as the world prepared for chaos, a different tragedy unfolded in a peaceful neighborhood in Chicago. The body of Michael Dunn, a well-known real estate broker, was found in his luxurious townhouse, once a symbol of achievement and success. The elegant residence, situated in the city's affluent district, had become a scene of horror. Michael's wife, Claire, discovered him early that morning upon returning from her jog, her heart pounding with shock and grief. When she opened the door to their bedroom, Michael lay motionless, a single bullet wound in his chest. The authorities were summoned immediately, and an investigation swiftly commenced, revealing complexities far beyond initial expectations. Michael was a well-connected man, highly regarded in Chicago's real estate scene, with ties to prominent business figures and influential personalities across the city. His wealth had surged over the years, fueling his ambitions, especially after expanding into luxury commercial properties. Rumors circulated that he had secured several lucrative deals, positioning him among Chicago's elite property magnates. Yet Michael's rise was not without challenges. Those close to him knew he was a man of contradictions. He was a devoted husband to Claire, a caring father to their 2 young children, and a generous philanthropist. Conversely, he was also known for his ruthless approach to business, willing to do whatever was necessary to close a deal. This duality earned him both admiration and resentment. As the investigation into his death unfolded, it became clear that his professional dealings had generated many enemies. But who would resort to violence to eliminate him? Detective James O'Connor, assigned to the case, was a seasoned investigator in his early 40s who had seen many brutal crimes. However, something about Michael's death unsettled him. He sensed there was more beneath the surface. His first interview was with Claire, who was devastated yet composed, as if she had anticipated such an event. "I don't know who would do this to him," she said, her voice trembling. "He was a good man, a loving husband, a wonderful father. We had everything, or so I thought." Her words were emotionally charged, but O'Connor detected a subtle tension and hesitation when she discussed her husband's business affairs. His instincts prompted him to delve deeper into Michael's professional life. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that Michael's success had come at a steep price. It didn't take long for O'Connor to discover that Michael had been embroiled in a fierce dispute with his former business partner, Robert Sloan. Sloan, a former college friend who had helped build Michael's real estate empire, had recently fallen out with him. Sources indicated that their conflict centered on a multi-million-dollar deal involving a downtown skyscraper. Michael had been pushing for a high-stakes acquisition with promising returns, while Sloan favored more cautious investments. Their disagreements had become public, fueling rumors that Michael's ambitions might have led him into dangerous territory. Detective O.K. Connor was investigating Sloan's attempt to secretly acquire his partner's share of the company. During his inquiries, he uncovered that Robert Sloan had a history of violent outbursts, with several employees recalling heated disputes between Sloan and Michael in the weeks before the incident. Some even claimed Sloan had threatened to destroy Michael if he proceeded with the deal. While Connor recognized Sloan's motive, he questioned whether Sloan had the means to carry out such an act. As the investigation progressed, more details emerged about Michael's questionable business dealings. Notably, one of his most profitable transactions involved purchasing a building from a notorious crime syndicate under FBI scrutiny. This raised suspicions that Michael might have unwittingly facilitated money laundering, although authorities had never built a solid case against him. Connor wondered if Michael's death stemmed from a failed business venture, but his deeper probe into Sloan's background made him suspect that someone more sinister could be involved, someone with a greater interest in Michael's downfall. Then, an anonymous tip shifted the focus. The caller claimed to have witnessed a tense argument between Michael and a woman just days before the tragedy. The woman was identified as Emily Carter, a high-ranking executive at one of Michael's real estate firms, involved in the shady dealings surrounding the skyscraper acquisition. Their relationship appeared to be more than professional. They had become romantically involved, though neither had publicly acknowledged it. The source revealed that their argument centered on money. Emily was furious because Michael had promised her a substantial payout for her role in the deal. When the deal collapsed, Michael reneged, leaving her without the compensation she expected. Connor decided to bring Emily in for questioning. She arrived composed and polished, masking any signs of the turmoil that had led to the incident. Initially, she denied involvement, insisting she had no part in Michael's death. However, as the interview continued, her story began to unravel. She admitted to her romantic relationship with Michael and confirmed they had argued over the failed deal. Under further pressure, Emily broke down, revealing her feelings of greed and frustration. She explained that she had worked tirelessly to ensure the skyscraper deal succeeded, only to be betrayed when Michael refused to honor his promise of payment. Her emotional confession painted a picture of a woman driven by disappointment and the desire for retribution. At the last moment, Emily claimed she had confronted him in a fit of rage, but insisted she never intended to cause his death. She maintained that it was Robert Sloan who had pushed her toward taking such a drastic step. According to Emily, Sloan had discovered her dispute with Michael and offered to help her exact revenge. He promised that if they eliminated Michael, they could divide his fortune and seize control of his real estate empire. Sloan, who had long been resentful of Michael for attempting to exclude him from the business, saw this as an opportunity to finally achieve his goal. Emily recounted that she and Sloan had devised the plan together. She lured Michael to his townhouse under the pretense of discussing business matters. Once inside, Sloan shot him, and they staged the scene to resemble a robbery gone wrong. Their confession was chilling, revealing that both were driven by greed and betrayal, each willing to take a life to fulfill their ambitions. They manipulated and used each other, ultimately destroying the life of a man who had once trusted them both. Following their arrest and charges for Michael's death, investigations into his business dealings revealed a more complex picture. It emerged that Michael had been involved in illegal activities, including money laundering and connections to criminal syndicates. This added layers of complexity to the case, showing that he was not merely a victim of treachery, but also a participant in illicit schemes that made him a target. Michael's tragic death served as a stark reminder of the dark currents flowing beneath the surface of his business world, where loyalty was fleeting and greed often overshadowed integrity. Though justice was ultimately served, the loss haunted those who knew him. His family, especially Claire, was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. His children grew up without their father, forever marked by the violent end to his life. Over time, the real estate empire Michael had built began to crumble as his partners distanced themselves from the scandal. His legacy was tarnished by the circumstances of his death, betrayed by those closest to him in a world dominated by power, wealth, and deception. As the case against Emily Carter and Robert Sloan advanced, the truth behind Michael's death gradually surfaced. Court proceedings featured testimonies from individuals familiar with both Michael and the accused, painting a vivid picture of a man ensnared in a web of ambition, greed, and treachery. Their arrests sent shockwaves through the real estate community, which had once admired Michael's success but now saw him as a victim of his own hubris. The trial drew significant media attention, with reporters eager to uncover any new details about the case, revealing the tragic consequences of a world where trust was fragile and greed could lead to destruction. The story of Michael's life, his dealings, and the events leading to his tragic passing unfolded before the public eye, forcing Claire to confront her deepest pain. She was compelled to relive the most difficult chapters of her life as her testimony became a symbol of the trauma inflicted by his loss. Throughout the trial, she listened as both the prosecutor and defense dissected her late husband's character, his business pursuits, and personal relationships. Her words were filled with emotion as she described the man she had loved, the father of her children, and the husband she once believed in. She spoke of his drive for success, which had propelled him to great heights, but also of the darker side of that ambition. It had created distance within their family and caused friction with colleagues and friends. Her voice trembled as she recounted the arguments they had in the months before his death, recalling his obsession with deals, late nights away from home, and his withdrawal from their relationship. Yet she maintained that she had never imagined his professional pursuits would ultimately lead to such a tragic outcome. While Claire's testimony painted Michael as a multifaceted individual, the prosecution's case centered on the betrayal and calculated nature of those responsible for his death. Expert witnesses detailed the planning behind the crime, emphasizing the evidence against Emily and Sloan. Forensic analysis confirmed that the firearm used was registered to Sloan, who could not explain how it had ended up at the scene. Surveillance footage showed Emily leaving the townhouse shortly after the incident, with timestamps aligning with the timeline of events. Sloan's defense argued that Emily had orchestrated the murder alone, manipulating Sloan into assisting her. However, the evidence painted a different picture. Witnesses testified about Sloan's suspicious behavior in the weeks prior, and phone records revealed frequent contact between him and Emily in the days leading up to the crime. Their collaboration was evident, despite attempts to blame each other. Ultimately, the jury found both Emily and Sloan guilty of first-degree murder. Their sentences were immediate, both receiving life imprisonment without the chance for parole. The judge's final remarks underscored the severity of the crime, condemning how both had turned against someone who had once trusted them, driven by greed and entitlement to commit such a brutal act against an innocent man. As the media coverage gradually subsided, the repercussions of Michael's death continued to ripple through Chicago's business community. Former partners, colleagues, and friends were left to rebuild their reputations and cope with the aftermath of the tragedy, each trying to move forward from the devastating loss. Long before his passing, Michael sensed that his dealings were becoming increasingly perilous. Despite this, some individuals remained loyal until the very end, only to realize their trust had been misplaced. One of the most profound outcomes of the trial was the intense scrutiny it cast on the high-stakes world of real estate. The case exposed the industry's darker facets, secretive negotiations, alliances based on self-interest, and a ruthless environment where betrayal was often driven by greed and the desire for power. Michael Dunn, once celebrated as a successful entrepreneur, became a cautionary figure illustrating how unchecked ambition can lead to downfall. The aftermath of the trial was almost as painful as the events leading to his death. In the years that followed, his widow, CLA, struggled to rebuild her life. She remained in the townhouse, but it no longer offered the comfort and security it once did. Instead, it became a somber reminder of her loss and the brutal way her husband was taken from her. CLA endeavored to move forward by focusing on her children and preserving Michael's memory, yet the emotional wounds never fully healed. Their children, Alex and Sophie, grew up in a world forever changed by their father's murder. At 9 years old, when the tragedy occurred, Alex found it difficult to reconcile the man he knew with the one involved in such a violent act. Too young to grasp the complexities of Michael's business dealings, he gradually learned about the secrets and deals that had surrounded his father's life as he matured. Sophie, younger and with fewer memories of her father, felt the pain of his absence deeply as she navigated adolescence. Over time, CLA moved out of the townhouse, unable to bear the weight of its memories. She sold the property and relocated to a smaller home far from her past life with Michael. The business empire Michael had built also crumbled after his death. The scandals and questions surrounding his illegal dealings became impossible to ignore, causing many of his former clients and partners to distance themselves. The empire he had dedicated himself to was left in ruins. In the years following the trial, both Emily and Sloan adjusted to life in prison. Emily, despite her involvement in the events, gained a reputation among inmates for her intelligence and charisma. She quickly became a formidable presence, though her guilt seemed to deepen with each passing year. Sloan, on the other hand, struggled with his incarceration. He never fully accepted his role in the events and often tried to justify his actions, but his explanations were met with scorn. The bitterness that had driven him to participate in Michael's downfall remained with him, consuming him from within. The impact of Michael's death lingered long after his time behind bars, shaping the lives of those close to him and leaving an indelible mark on his family. His passing, though tragic, served as a stark warning within the business community, highlighting the perils of unchecked ambition, betrayal, and greed that can devastate lives. Despite his wealth and success, Michael's existence was a delicate balancing act between personal integrity and professional ambition. He had built an empire on strategic deals, yet ultimately it was his choices, the trust he placed in certain individuals, and the darkness lurking within those he considered allies that led to his downfall. His story, one of relentless pursuit of success intertwined with treachery, resonated through courtrooms and boardrooms alike, serving as a somber reminder of the high cost of success at any expense. Over time, Michael Dunn's murder receded from headlines, but its shadow persisted within Chicago's elite circles. The real estate sector, once thriving with lucrative opportunities, was left shaken by the scandal surrounding his death. Rumors swirled about the ruthless nature of the environment where Michael had thrived, casting doubt on the ethical boundaries of ambition, wealth, and influence. The empire he had built on morally questionable deals crumbled under the weight of scandal, yet the tragic end of his life continued to resonate, especially among those who knew him personally. One of the most deeply affected was Harold Manning, a longtime business partner who had worked closely with Michael for over 10 years. Their collaboration had been vital to the growth of Michael's enterprise. Unlike many others who distanced themselves after the tragedy, Harold remained somewhat loyal, though with reluctance. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, knowing that his close friend had been deceived by trusted associates. At the same time, Harold grappled with the uncomfortable truth that he had also benefited from Michael's often ruthless tactics. Following the trial and conviction of Emily and Sloan, Harold attempted to rebuild what remained of the once flourishing firm. However, the stain of Michael's criminal dealings and the tragic circumstances surrounding his death made recovery nearly impossible. Investors withdrew their support, unwilling to be associated with Michael's tarnished legacy. As Harold watched his company disintegrate, he questioned whether the life he had built was worth the moral cost. He struggled with his own complicity in the darker aspects of their business dealings, gradually distancing himself from the wreckage of his professional life. Claire Dunn faced the daunting task of rebuilding her family's future after a devastating loss. She had always been the steady anchor in Michael's life, the one who kept their family grounded while he chased his ambitions. Yet now she found herself engaged in a different kind of struggle, one not against ruthless rivals or business enemies, but against her own grief. She mourned the man she loved, the father of her children, and the life they had once shared. The financial fallout from Michael's passing left her in a fragile position, with uncertain prospects for her children's future and their college savings dwindling amid the aftermath of a widely publicized scandal. In the years immediately following the tragedy, Claire chose to stay out of the spotlight. She refused most interviews and turned down offers to tell her story, instead dedicating herself to raising Alex and Sophie. Her priority was shielding them from the harsh realities of their father's complex past and the consequences of his actions. She often found herself explaining the intricacies of Michael's business dealings, trying to preserve their idealized image of him. To her children, Michael had been a hero, a hard-working provider, yet Claire knew the truth was far more complicated. Still, she couldn't bear to shatter their innocent perception when so much had already been taken from them. As the years passed, a decade in total, Alex and Sophie began forging their own identities distinct from the shadow of their father's legacy. 10-year-old Alex, at the time of Michael's death, chose to pursue law. His goal was to understand the justice system, human behavior, and the motives behind actions, partly to make sense of the tragedy that had marked his childhood, and partly to achieve something his father had never fully attained: peace. His desire was to seek justice not only for Michael, but also for others affected by similar ruthless acts. Sophie, younger and only 6 when her father died, struggled more with her memories. Her recollections of Michael were vague, and what she remembered most was the void his absence created in their home. She found solace in art, using painting and sculpture to express feelings she couldn't put into words. Her work often explored themes of loss and betrayal, delving into the darkness that had overshadowed her father's life. Art became her therapy, a way to process long-buried emotions and regain control over her childhood narrative, which had been overshadowed by tragedy. Meanwhile, Claire grappled with the difficult choices ahead. The passage of time had not eased her pain. She spent years piecing together the shattered fragments of her life. Yet, despite her efforts to move forward, the ache of loss persisted, reminding her of the profound impact her husband's death had left on their family's story. Feeling that something was still missing, she had tried to fill the emptiness through new relationships, but nothing could match the life she once knew. Memories of Michael, both joyful and painful, clung to her like a second skin. Sometimes she still heard the echoes of their arguments, the harsh words spoken in moments of frustration, or the quiet evenings when they shared hopes for the future. During the stillness of night, when the house was silent, she often reached for a life that no longer existed. For years, Claire avoided mentioning Michael publicly. The world had turned against him, and she withdrew inwardly to shield her children from the judgment surrounding their father's reputation. Yet, as time passed, she began to find solace in life's smaller moments, the laughter of her children and the warmth of a new family she was gradually building. Claire realized that, despite Michael's actions having profoundly altered their lives, she could still forge a new path for herself and her children. She learned to forgive, though the pain and loss that marked her past would never fully fade. Michael's legacy lingered in Chicago, a story of ambition gone awry, betrayal, and tragedy, where greed and power often overshadowed moral responsibility. Still, those closest to him moved forward, scarred but stronger for having endured the aftermath. Alex and Sophie, though forever affected by their father's absence, found their own ways to cope with the legacy he left behind. Meanwhile, Emily and Sloane served their sentences, their once bright futures consumed by greed-driven choices made in pursuit of wealth and influence. Ultimately, their own destructive tendencies sealed their fates. The actions of the perpetrators forever changed the lives of the D family, yet time gradually mended even the deepest wounds. Claire, Alex, and Sophie might never forget that dark chapter, but they learned to rebuild piece by piece. The story of Michael Dunn ended as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the fragile nature of trust. His legacy, however, continued to resonate through his family, who had found a way to survive the darkness and move toward a brighter future. In 2002, a chilling discovery shook the quiet suburban neighborhood of Westfield, a small town just outside Chicago. On January 14th, the body of Nathaniel Hayes, a 42-year-old prominent businessman, was found in his upscale home. The scene was brutal, a life violently taken. Investigators quickly realized this was no ordinary case. It was clear Nathaniel's death was not accidental. The question remained, who had motive to end such a prosperous life and why? Nathaniel Hayes had built a notable reputation in the construction industry, transforming his modest startup into one of the leading firms in the Midwest. Known for his sharp intellect and talent for closing lucrative deals, he amassed both wealth and influence. Those familiar with him described Nathaniel as ambitious, driven, and meticulous in every detail of his work. However, these same traits also earned him enemies. As his fortune grew, so did the number of individuals who found themselves on the wrong side of his business decisions. It was an open secret within the industry that Nathaniel often prioritized his success over others, sometimes to the detriment of colleagues and competitors alike, even ruining careers with a single decisive move. The first officers arriving at Nathaniel's residence encountered a grim scene. His body was found sprawled across the living room floor near a large bay window overlooking the sprawling garden. It was evident he had been shot multiple times, with blood splattered across the floor and furniture. Strangely, there was no sign of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The front door was left slightly open, which was unusual given Nathaniel's cautious nature. Initial investigations suggested the perpetrator was someone familiar with Nathaniel's routines, someone who knew his habits well. Detective Jennifer Brooks, leading the case, quickly began analyzing the crime scene. She noted the absence of any signs of a struggle, implying Nathaniel might have been caught off guard or perhaps knew his attacker. The safe in his study remained untouched, indicating that robbery was unlikely. Instead, Brooks suspected a personal motive, driven more by emotion than financial gain. A key lead emerged from a phone call Nathaniel made just hours before his death. A neighbor, who had been watching television late into the night, reported seeing Nathaniel's black SUV parked outside his home around midnight. It was unusual for Nathaniel to stay out so late, especially with his vehicle left in such a conspicuous spot. The neighbor observed a tall man with short dark hair, wearing a leather jacket, speaking animatedly with Nathaniel through the car window. The man left as quickly as he arrived, disappearing into the night. This description matched that of Daniel Pierce, a former employee of Nathaniel's construction company. Daniel had been dismissed several months earlier following a heated dispute over a high-profile project that had gone significantly over budget. The failure of that project had cost Nathaniel millions, and Daniel had accused him of mismanaging funds, blaming him for the collapse. Their relationship had rapidly deteriorated, and Daniel's departure was far from amicable. Detective Brooks quickly acted on Nathaniel's threats to tarnish his reputation, which claimed he would reveal unethical business practices. This led to an arrest warrant for Daniel Pierce as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Daniel had a clear motive rooted in revenge and was seen near Nathaniel's residence shortly before the incident. However, when authorities searched his apartment, it was found deserted, and Daniel had disappeared. As the investigation progressed, more unsettling details about Nathaniel's personal life emerged. Interviews with those close to him revealed that, despite his success in building an empire, he had sacrificed genuine relationships. He was known for ruthless tactics, both in business and personal dealings, often abandoning colleagues who threatened his rise. Many testified that Nathaniel had once promised to support their careers, but withdrew support when their success posed a challenge to him. His reputation in the construction industry was marked by aggressive ambition and manipulation, leaving many who crossed him feeling betrayed. Further inquiry uncovered a series of secretive emails between Nathaniel and several senior officials in local government. These messages hinted at questionable zoning approvals, under-the-table deals, and covert negotiations related to land development projects. The correspondence suggested that Nathaniel might have been involved in bribing officials to secure lucrative contracts. Although some officials named in the emails were investigated, none were directly linked to the crime. Despite mounting evidence pointing towards Daniel Pierce, Detective Brooks remained unconvinced that he was the sole culprit. While Daniel had a motive, the method of the attack, precise cold shots fired into Nathaniel's chest, did not seem characteristic of him. Brooks suspected that someone with a more calculated mind might have been involved, possibly collaborating with Daniel to bring Nathaniel down. A breakthrough occurred when forensic experts identified a partial fingerprint on the murder weapon's handle. The print did not match Daniel's, but belonged to Robert Dillard, a wealthy investor involved in some of Nathaniel's recent projects. Robert had been a silent figure from the start, a key financial supporter in the high-stakes world of real estate. Over time, their relationship had soured. Robert grew frustrated with Nathaniel's failure to fulfill promises and began distancing himself. Rumors indicated Robert had invested heavily in a project Nathaniel mishandled, resulting in significant financial losses for him. When questioned, Robert revealed that he had been meeting with others related to the case, hinting at deeper involvement. Just days before the tragic event, Daniel Pierce and Nathaniel Hayes had been engaged in conversations primarily about Nathaniel's business dealings. However, these discussions soon revealed underlying tensions, as both men harbored growing frustrations. Initially, Robert Dillard claimed that he and Daniel had only considered legal actions against Nathaniel, but investigators uncovered a darker truth. Their meetings had gone far beyond mere negotiations. Robert sought ways to recover his financial losses, while Daniel was willing to go to any lengths for revenge. It became evident that the two had conspired together to orchestrate Nathaniel's murder. Driven by personal vendetta, Daniel acted as the executioner, while Robert supplied the planning and resources. Their collaboration resulted in the downfall of a man who had once been a prominent figure in the business world. On January 27, 2002, law enforcement arrested Robert Dillard and Daniel Pierce during a coordinated operation. They faced charges of first-degree murder, and the case quickly moved to trial. The prosecution laid out a compelling narrative supported by overwhelming evidence that exposed their conspiracy. The motives, revenge fueled by betrayal and greed, made the case particularly chilling. Detective Brooks described it as one of the most disturbing cases he had encountered, highlighting the cold calculation behind the crime. Throughout the lengthy trial, both men attempted to shift blame. Daniel's defense argued that he had been manipulated by Robert, claiming he acted out of misplaced loyalty. Conversely, Robert insisted their meetings were purely business-related, denying any involvement in planning the murder. Despite these defenses, the jury remained unconvinced, and both men were found guilty of first-degree murder. They received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Nathaniel Hayes' death sent shockwaves through the local business community, leaving scars that would take years to heal. His loss was a stark reminder of how unchecked ambition and greed could lead individuals to extreme measures. For those who once admired his success, the case served as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of betrayal and avarice. As the legal proceedings concluded, the repercussions of Nathaniel's murder continued to ripple through the community. What initially appeared to be a personal vendetta revealed deeper issues within the ruthless world of high-stakes real estate and commerce, where loyalty was fragile and alliances were often temporary. Ultimately, the tragedy underscored that behind the pursuit of wealth and power, there are darker forces at play, capable of destroying even the most seemingly untouchable figures. In the wake of Nathaniel's downfall, the business community in Westfield was forever changed, with many former allies distancing themselves from his name and legacy. Some projects were halted as investors reevaluated the long-term risks associated with his criminal associations. Those who once praised Nathaniel now faced awkward conversations with clients and colleagues, some attempting to minimize their past ties to a man once seen as a symbol of success. Others openly criticized his methods, trying to dissociate from the more questionable aspects of his enterprise. Despite the collapse of Nathaniel's empire and the tarnishing of his reputation, a few still remembered him differently. For some residents, his early contributions had helped shape Westfield's skyline, and his company had provided employment to hundreds. To them, Nathaniel was not merely a ruthless businessman, but a figure who had left a lasting imprint on their town's landscape. His untimely death sparked a debate about the true cost of success, whether climbing the corporate ladder was worth sacrificing integrity and personal relationships. This philosophical question lingered long after the trial concluded. For Claire Hayes, Nathaniel's widow, the verdict of Daniel and Robert's guilt offered little solace. The closure many hoped for never fully arrived. While she was relieved justice had been served, she grappled with the painful realization that the man she loved and shared her life with had led a double existence, one far darker than she had ever suspected. Her grief was intensified by the knowledge that Nathaniel's legacy was forever tainted by the violent manner of his departure. Claire spent countless hours reflecting on her marriage, trying to reconcile the man she adored with the man who had betrayed so many. She acknowledged that Nathaniel could be charming, persuasive, and even caring at times, yet she could not ignore the many enemies he had made. She questioned whether she truly knew him, or if her admiration for his success had blinded her to his flaws. Her focus had often been on his achievements and their comfortable life, sometimes overlooking the darker aspects of his personality. This realization left her pondering whether her own silence and complicity had contributed to her acceptance of his faults, or if she had simply been blinded by the allure of his ambition. A heavy burden settled upon her, making it difficult to remain present for her children, Alex and Sophie, who were left to piece together the fragments of their shattered world. When Alex, then just 18, faced the aftermath of his father's death, he found himself thrust into the role of protector for his younger sister. The emotional toll of losing his father was overwhelming, especially as he grappled with the painful truth that his father's actions had contributed to his own loss. The tragedy had robbed him of the chance to forge a meaningful relationship with Nathaniel, fueling feelings of anger and resentment that threatened to consume him. He resented the media frenzy that followed, with reporters camped outside their home, constantly seeking comments, despite his efforts to stay composed. In the midst of this chaos, Alex struggled to reconcile his conflicting emotions, the love he once felt for his father and the bitterness toward the man responsible for destroying their family's future. Meanwhile, Sophie, at only 14, endured her own silent suffering. Too young to fully understand the complexities behind her father's choices, she still felt the emotional strain deeply. She often retreated into her art, pouring her feelings into drawings and paintings that grew more abstract and intense over time, mirroring her inner turmoil. Though she loved her father despite his flaws, the revelation of his betrayal and the consequences of his actions left her heartbroken. Caught between cherishing the good memories and feeling overwhelming anger, Sophie struggled to find her place amid the chaos. As months passed, their mother Claire focused on restoring a sense of normalcy for her children. She sought comfort within her community, leaning on close friends for support. Determined to give her children a better future, she was willing to uproot their lives and leave behind the shadows cast by Nathaniel's legacy. Claire dedicated herself to working for a local charity, using her skills to assist others affected by violent crimes. Her work provided her with a renewed sense of purpose, transforming her grief into a force for good. Though the journey was arduous, it brought her peace amid the upheaval. For Alex and Sophie, the road ahead remained uncertain. Both continued to navigate the complex emotions tied to their father's death, trying to understand a life overshadowed by violence and betrayal. Despite inheriting their father's ambition and drive, they were committed to making different choices rooted in integrity and honesty. They vowed never to forget the lessons learned from their tragedy, even as they pursued their own dreams and aspirations. Meanwhile, the city of Westfield carried on, bearing witness to their ongoing struggle to rebuild and find hope amid the ruins of their past. Once celebrated for his prosperous ventures and close ties to Nathaniel Hayes, the community of Westfield now viewed his legacy with deep suspicion. The construction projects he had championed had come to a halt or been abandoned altogether, and the once thriving development deals that had injected vitality into the local economy had fallen into chaos. Nathaniel's passing had shattered the fabric of a community that depended heavily on his success, and rebuilding the trust that was lost would take many years. His death served as a stark reminder of how far individuals might go in pursuit of influence and wealth, often leading to betrayal among those who had once been allies and partners. Ultimately, his story underscored the fragile nature of human life and how one person's actions could cast long-lasting shadows over many others' lives. Nathaniel Hayes' narrative was not one of heroism or redemption. Rather, it stood as a cautionary tale about the destructive potential of unchecked ambition and the costs of relentless pursuit of power. Over time, the dark cloud surrounding his murder continued to cast a pall over Westfield, becoming an integral part of its history. The tragedy was often spoken of in hushed tones during community gatherings as residents recounted his rise to prominence, his ruthless business dealings, and his violent demise. His story became woven into local lore, shared at dinner tables and pondered by curious minds, wondering how a man seemingly at the peak of success could have met such a brutal end. Despite the convictions of two individuals, Daniel Pierce and Robert Dillard, questions persisted about the true scope of Nathaniel's involvement in illicit activities. New evidence emerged, shedding light on his business practices and revealing testimonies from previously silent witnesses. Some of these revelations suggested a far more complex web of corruption, indicating that Nathaniel had not only encountered dangerous figures, but may have been a significant figure within a larger network of illegal operations. Rumors circulated about his possible links to money laundering, organized crime, and whispers of connections to a notorious underground syndicate operating across the Midwest. The notion that Nathaniel might have been a key player in this shadowy network added layers of complexity to the case, fueling speculation that others besides Robert and Daniel could have had motives for his death. Detective Brooks, who had overseen the investigation, found herself revisiting the case years later, intrigued by these new developments. She began delving into Nathaniel's business dealings, seeking any links to organized crime or clandestine figures from his past. As the years passed, anonymous tips about Nathaniel's associations continued to surface, hinting at a much deeper and more intricate connection to the criminal underworld than initially believed. A lead emerged from a former associate of Nathaniel who had collaborated with him on a development project riddled with financial irregularities. Now in hiding after receiving threats, this individual claimed that Nathaniel was deeply involved in manipulating city contracts as part of a broader scheme to divert funds and corrupt accounts controlled by a powerful elite. This revelation sent shockwaves through law enforcement, prompting Detective Brooks and her team to revisit old evidence and conduct new interviews. They uncovered that several of Nathaniel's close business partners, some of whom had been in his inner circle, disappeared in the years following his death. Some were found under suspicious circumstances, while others simply vanished without a trace. Further investigation revealed that several high-ranking city officials, once close to Nathaniel, had been scrutinized for corruption but never formally charged. It appeared Nathaniel was not only engaged in shady dealings, but also possibly a conduit for larger legal activities. The investigation progressed slowly and carefully as Brooks and her team mapped out a complex web of financial transactions, secret meetings, and coded communications, pointing to an extensive criminal network. As they uncovered more, it became clear that Nathaniel Hayes had been involved in a dangerous game where the stakes extended beyond business, threatening the lives of those around him. He had made enemies across various levels of society, from the business world to local government. As the inquiry deepened, Brooks wondered whether Nathaniel's murder was merely the surface of a much larger hidden story. To pursue these leads, she reached out to other law enforcement agencies across multiple states, focusing on the underground syndicates suspected of linking to Nathaniel's activities. This new phase immersed her in a shadowy world of coded messages, hidden accounts, and elusive figures operating far beneath public awareness. Meanwhile, the memory of Nathaniel's death continued to weigh heavily on those closest to him. For his widow, Claire, the recent revelations only intensified her grief. It had been painful enough to lose her husband violently, but now the possibility that he was involved in dangerous dealings cast a shadow of betrayal over her memories. Having already faced the challenge of rebuilding her life after Nathaniel's passing, Ayal had managed to raise her children without him, yet she now confronted the unsettling possibility that the man she loved might have been someone entirely different from the person she believed him to be. Her children, Alex and Sophie, also found themselves caught in this new wave of revelations. For Alex, now in his 20s, the discovery of his father's involvement in criminal activities was a devastating blow. He had worked tirelessly to distance himself from Nathaniel's shadow, determined to forge his own identity free from his father's tarnished legacy. But as the truth surfaced, Alex questioned whether he had been naive in thinking Nathaniel's actions hadn't influenced his own life. Sophie, still haunted by her father's murder, struggled to make sense of the new facts. She had idolized Nathaniel, viewing him as a hero who had built a life for their family. Now, that image was shattered, leaving her with more questions than answers. The investigation also cast a shadow over Westfield itself. Once proud of Nathaniel's contributions to the town's development, residents now grappled with the darker side of his legacy. Local officials, some involved in his projects, faced tough questions about their connections with him. The media, which had once celebrated Nathaniel as a success story, shifted its focus to uncovering the truth behind his death. This media frenzy threatened to destabilize the town's economy as investors withdrew from ongoing projects amid growing uncertainty. Throughout this turmoil, the investigation into Nathaniel's murder pressed on. Detective Brooks and her team were determined to uncover every detail, peeling back layers of his complex life. They uncovered evidence pointing toward a multifaceted conspiracy, whether driven by personal vendettas, business rivalries, or his alleged involvement in illicit dealings. One thing was clear: Nathaniel's death was no ordinary case. It revealed a dark underbelly of ambition, power, and greed. As the investigation advanced, it became evident that Nathaniel Hayes' story was far from over. New details emerged, threatening to expose even deeper layers of deception woven into his life. Over the years, the true nature of his legacy remained an unresolved question, one that Westfield and his family would continue to wrestle with for many years to come. The tragic loss of Emily Weston, a highly regarded schoolteacher, sent shockwaves through the community, leaving residents grappling with questions that seemed impossible to answer. As days turned into weeks, the investigation peeled back layers of secrets, lies, and unexpected connections that no one had anticipated. Emily, at 32, was a cherished figure in Brentwood, having dedicated nearly 10 years to teaching at the local elementary school. Her colleagues remembered her as compassionate, enthusiastic, and deeply committed to her students. She often stayed after hours to tutor those struggling or to organize extracurricular activities, reflecting her genuine care for her pupils. Beyond her professional life, Emily was active at the town's community center, volunteering at various events and charity initiatives. Her personal life, though private, appeared content. She lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house on the town's outskirts, always ready with a warm smile or a helping hand to neighbors in need. On the morning of January 15th, 2002, Emily's absence from work sparked concern. Her students arrived to find her missing from her usual role as their homeroom teacher, which was unlike her. Known for her punctuality and reliability, Emily's unexplained absence raised immediate alarms. By midday, a worried colleague contacted Emily's neighbor, Mrs. Gloria Reynolds, an elderly woman who often kept an eye on her. When Mrs. Reynolds found Emily's door slightly open and the yard eerily quiet, she decided to check inside. Inside, she discovered a scene of chaos. Furniture overturned, books scattered, and a faint, unsettling odor lingering in the air. In a corner of the room, Emily lay motionless, her body sprawled on the floor, showing signs of a brutal attack. Blood pooled around her head, and her face bore multiple injuries, indicating she had been struck repeatedly. Horrified, Mrs. Reynolds immediately called emergency services. Within minutes, police arrived to secure the scene and begin their investigation. Detective Sarah Thompson, a seasoned officer with over 15 years of experience in Brentwood, was assigned to lead the case. Known for her sharp attention to detail and composed demeanor, she quickly recognized that this was no ordinary crime scene. The initial findings revealed disturbing inconsistencies that suggested deeper, more complex motives behind Emily's death. Detective Thompson carefully examined the scene, noting that Emily's car was parked in the driveway with no signs of forced entry. The front door had been left slightly ajar, yet the house itself showed no signs of a break-in or theft, and nothing appeared to be missing. The furniture in the living room was disturbed, indicating a struggle between Emily and her attacker before she was struck. However, what truly drew the detective's attention was a broken picture frame lying on the floor near Emily's body. Inside the frame was a photograph of Emily with her former fiancé, Michael Davis. Though subtle, this detail prompted Thompson to consider whether Michael might be connected to the incident. As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that Emily and Michael had been engaged for nearly 2 years before their breakup, which had occurred a few months earlier. Friends and family described the separation as difficult for Emily, and it was widely believed that Michael had struggled to accept the end of their relationship. While Emily had moved on and was seeing someone new, she kept her current relationship private. Conversely, Michael was reported to have been deeply affected by the breakup, often showing up uninvited at places where Emily was present. Several colleagues mentioned that Emily had become increasingly uneasy around Michael in the months before her death, with some describing him as obsessive, while others noted he remained polite but distant in public. Digging into Michael's background, Thompson uncovered troubling patterns. The 34-year-old accountant had faced personal difficulties in recent months, including losing his job after an audit revealed discrepancies in his financial records. Following his dismissal, Michael became more reclusive, frequently appearing unannounced at Emily's home and sending her persistent messages despite her requests for him to stop. It seemed he had not coped well with their breakup and had developed an unhealthy fixation on winning her back. A search of his residence uncovered further evidence of his troubled state. Personal items belonging to Emily, such as a scarf she had left during a visit months earlier and a letter she had written during their engagement, had been taken without her permission. Additionally, police found a note in which Michael expressed his desire to reconcile, claiming he would do anything to regain her trust. Several journal entries revealed his feelings of betrayal and his belief that Emily had moved on too quickly. With this mounting evidence, Michael Davis emerged as the primary suspect, prompting authorities to bring him in for questioning. After hours of intense questioning, Michael finally broke down and confessed. He revealed that on the morning of January 15th, he had gone to Emily's house, intending to persuade her to reconsider their relationship. When she rejected him once more, his frustration turned into anger. In a fit of rage, he attacked her with a heavy metal object, striking her multiple times in the head. Emily's desperate attempt to escape was futile. She was overpowered and ultimately lost her life. In his confession, Michael admitted he had planned the act beforehand, driven by a sense of entitlement and a misguided belief that Emily owed him another chance. The community of Brentwood was left stunned by the revelation of his involvement in such a tragic event. Emily Weston, a kind-hearted schoolteacher who had profoundly touched many lives, was taken from them in a senseless act of violence. Once a familiar face in town, Michael Davis was now a convicted individual whose actions had shattered the lives of those who knew her. Emily's friends, family, and colleagues mourned her deeply, remembering her dedication and selflessness. The trial of Michael Davis was lengthy and painful, but justice was ultimately achieved. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Over time, Brentwood slowly began to heal, yet Emily's memory persisted. A scholarship was established in her name at the local school, and her students, past and present, continued to honor her through acts of kindness and a commitment to learning. Though her life was tragically cut short, Emily's legacy endured through the lives she had touched and the lessons she had imparted about compassion, resilience, and appreciating every moment. For many in Brentwood, her death served as a haunting reminder that even those we believe we know well can harbor darkness. It also highlighted the dangers of obsession and the destructive power of unchecked anger and jealousy. Ultimately, Emily's passing became a somber testament to life's fragility and the devastating outcomes that can result when the human heart is consumed by rage and unreciprocated love. In the months following her death, the town struggled to come to terms with the loss of its beloved teacher and active community member, a void that no one could fill. Her impact on the town was profound, and her brutal loss tore apart the close-knit fabric that once held everyone together. As time moved on, Brentwood gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the tragedy remained a lingering shadow in the community's collective memory. Whispered rumors about her circulated quietly in coffee shops, while her colleagues continued to feel her absence daily within the classroom. Her students, some just shy of graduation when tragedy struck, honored her memory by excelling academically and demonstrating the same dedication she had always shown. The local school district responded by offering counseling services to those most affected, helping them process their grief. Yet no one could escape the lingering shadow of that tragic event. One of the most painful realizations for Emily's loved ones was understanding how her death might have been prevented. Many reflected on the months leading up to the incident, recalling how Michael Davis's obsession with Emily had intensified over time. Unfortunately, warning signs had gone unnoticed until it was too late. Michael's behavior had become increasingly unpredictable in the months before the tragedy. Friends remembered how, despite Emily's polite but firm requests for him to respect her boundaries, he continued to show up uninvited at her home. He had also begun calling her late into the night, leaving increasingly angry and frustrated messages. Emily had confided in close friends about her concerns, sharing her worries over his persistent behavior. However, her reluctance to make a fuss meant that others did not fully grasp the severity of Michael's fixation until it was too late. As investigators delved into his background, Detective Thompson uncovered a troubling pattern. Michael's financial difficulties were an immediate concern, but his history of emotional instability stretched back years. He had been married once before, but his wife left after a particularly volatile argument. Neighbors reported frequent disputes, including an incident where Michael allegedly displayed aggressive behavior. His ex-wife, now living out of state, declined to comment when approached by authorities, but it was clear that Michael had long struggled with deep-seated emotional issues. The psychological profile of Michael Davis painted a disturbing picture. He had difficulty handling rejection and failure, traits that affected many aspects of his life. The end of his engagement with Emily appeared to be a critical blow, damaging his ego and triggering a downward spiral. To him, Emily was more than just a person. She symbolized everything he had lost. His obsession grew increasingly unhealthy, ultimately becoming a dangerous fixation. Despite mounting evidence against him, the community found it difficult to fully comprehend how someone they had known for years could have committed such an act. The tragedy left a lasting impact, forcing everyone to confront the unsettling reality of how unnoticed warning signs can lead to irreversible consequences. In a quiet community, a man who was once a familiar face at local gatherings and events became the center of a shocking crime. Michael had always appeared polite and friendly in public, leading many to believe he was a well-adjusted individual. His breakup with Emily was seen as mutual and amicable, and few suspected the turmoil lurking beneath his calm exterior. It was only after the tragic event that the true extent of his emotional instability and inner struggles came to light. The trial of Michael Davis commenced in late summer of the year 2002. The courtroom was tense, with Emily's family and friends seated prominently, their eyes fixed on the defendant as proceedings unfolded. Michael sat motionless, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the jurors, yet never meeting those who once knew him well. His legal team argued that the act was not premeditated, but a moment of passion, an impulsive reaction fueled by rejection and emotional distress. They claimed that he had been overwhelmed by feelings he could not fully control at the time. However, the prosecution presented a starkly different narrative. They detailed how Michael's actions leading up to the incident appeared calculated and deliberate. Evidence included text messages, phone records, and journal entries that revealed a disturbing obsession with Emily. Forensic analysis showed that the force used to strike Emily's head was precise and controlled, indicating that the assault was not a spontaneous outburst but a cold, planned act. The defense sought to portray Michael as a man pushed to his limits by emotional pain, someone who lost control in a moment of despair. Yet the jury was unconvinced. After weeks of testimony and careful deliberation, they found Michael guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. The verdict sparked a range of reactions within the community of Brentwood. Some felt justice had been achieved, while others struggled to reconcile the man they once knew with the crime he committed. Emily Weston's funeral was a somber event, drawing the community together to honor her memory. Despite the grief, her family found some comfort in knowing she had lived a life full of love and purpose. Her obituary, widely published, described her as a kind and generous woman, dedicated to nurturing young minds and actively participating in her community. Her legacy remained a testament to her compassionate spirit, leaving an indelible mark on those who knew her. The realization that Emily's passing was not solely a result of her efforts or the students she had inspired, but also a reflection of the lessons she shared about kindness, compassion, and resilience, left a lasting impact on those who knew her. These values continued to resonate in the hearts of many long after her death. The investigation into Emily's murder and Michael Davis's subsequent trial marked a significant chapter in Brentwood's history, yet the repercussions of that tragedy persisted for years. In the aftermath, the community actively worked to raise awareness about domestic violence and unhealthy emotional dependencies. Support groups were established to assist individuals struggling with destructive relationships, and local schools began incorporating education on recognizing emotional manipulation and fostering healthy connections. Although these initiatives could not bring Emily back, they represented meaningful steps toward preventing similar tragedies. For Detective Thompson, the case remained a haunting memory. Despite her extensive experience with violent crimes, Emily's death stood out as particularly unsettling because it had been committed by someone once close to her, someone who had been part of her life. This made acceptance more difficult, yet she understood that justice had ultimately been served. Michael Davis was now confined behind bars, paying the price for the life he had taken, and Emily Weston's spirit endured beyond her physical absence. Her memory continued to inspire not only the residents of Brentwood, but also everyone touched by her kindness and dedication. Months after the verdict, the town gradually returned to its routines, yet the wounds from Emily's loss remained fresh. While many felt relief that justice had been achieved, a sense of disbelief lingered. Emily's absence was felt daily, within classrooms, community gatherings, and quiet moments of reflection. The tragedy revealed the darker facets of human nature, leaving the community weary and more cautious. Many residents had known Michael in some capacity. Some had trusted him, making his transformation into a perpetrator all the more shocking. This event prompted the townspeople to question how well they truly knew those around them. Emily's family found some solace in knowing that Michael would no longer walk among them. They mourned her quietly, honoring her life with dignity, yet the pain of her loss remained deep. In the months following the trial, they often visited her grave, mourning the bright future that had been cut short. Her parents, proud of her achievements, grappled with the unanswered question of why Emily had been taken from them. No explanations or closure could ease their grief, only the painful awareness that her life had been stolen by the man who once claimed to be her friend. The community of Brentwood grappled with the profound loss of Emily, a beloved teacher who had been more than just an educator. She was a mentor, a guiding presence, and a nurturing figure for many students. Her tragic passing cast a heavy shadow over the district, prompting relentless efforts to support both students and staff most affected by the tragedy. As news of her death spread, many students struggled to process their grief. Some acted out, while others withdrew into themselves. In response, the school established counseling services for all those in need and set up an anonymous hotline to provide additional support. Eventually, Emily's classroom was transformed into a memorial space, adorned with photographs, heartfelt notes, and mementos from her students. This room, once filled with laughter and learning, now served as a lasting tribute to her legacy. Among those touched by her kindness was a young girl named Sarah, one of Emily's most dedicated pupils. Deeply affected by her teacher's loss, Sarah found solace in the memorial, where she read notes and gazed at Emily's photographs. Inspired by her mentor's compassion, Sarah resolved to carry forward Emily's spirit by launching an after-school tutoring program for younger students struggling academically. Over time, this initiative grew into a vital part of Brentwood's educational efforts, symbolizing how Emily's influence continued to inspire. As the community mourned, they also began to confront uncomfortable truths about emotional health and unhealthy attachments. Emily's death prompted open conversations about mental well-being and the dangers of obsession and emotional dependence, issues many had previously ignored. The tragedy fostered a sense of unity, encouraging residents to support one another more openly. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Thompson, who led the investigation into Michael's involvement, found herself haunted by the case. Despite her experience with numerous investigations, this one left a lasting impression. In quiet moments, she was haunted by the image of the blood-stained living room and the photograph of Emily. She recognized that Michael's obsession with Emily had deepened over time, yet it was only when it was too late that anyone understood the extent of his fixation. Having previously handled cases of domestic violence, Sarah felt a personal connection to this tragedy, which left her with an unshakable sense of guilt. The realization that warning signs had been overlooked weighed heavily on her, underscoring the devastating impact of unaddressed emotional turmoil. A close-knit community, once unaware of the warning signs, was left to confront difficult questions after Emily's tragic passing. Could her death have been prevented? Were there clues everyone overlooked? Detective Thompson dedicated herself to uncovering answers, examining patterns of obsessive behavior and revisiting overlooked or underreported cases. She collaborated with local organizations focused on mental health awareness and domestic violence prevention, aiming to foster understanding and support. Over time, Brentwood saw a steady rise in public campaigns and community programs designed to identify and address unhealthy emotional dependencies. Alongside these efforts, Thompson organized workshops to educate residents about emotional manipulation, controlling behaviors, and establishing healthy boundaries in relationships. Though small, these initiatives played a vital role in the town's healing process. The town's leaders recognized that Emily's death had exposed uncomfortable truths about human relationships, prompting a commitment to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Despite Michael Davis's life imprisonment, unresolved questions lingered in the public consciousness. Was he truly a threat to society, or had he simply lost control? Emily's family would never have definitive answers, never know if his remorse was genuine or if his confession was motivated by a desire to avoid a harsher penalty. Their loss remained a profound and painful absence with no closure, only the tragic reality of a life taken in the most senseless way. The case drew attention beyond the town, sparking debates among criminal psychologists and law enforcement nationwide. Experts discussed whether the justice system had adequately addressed issues like emotional manipulation and relationship-driven violence. Michael's case became a reference point, illustrating how obsession could escalate into danger, raising broader questions about societal responses to early warning signs before tragedy occurs. While Emily Weston's death marked a dark chapter in Brentwood's history, it also served as a catalyst for change. The town gradually began to recover, growing stronger and more resilient. It learned from its past mistakes and committed itself to ensuring that Emily's memory would inspire ongoing efforts to prevent similar losses. For those who knew her, her spirit endured through acts of kindness, compassion, and the community's renewed dedication to understanding and support. Emily had been a teacher, a mentor, a friend. Her influence continued through the lives she touched and the lessons she left behind. In a community that cherished her memory, Emily's enduring influence continued to inspire others to listen with compassion and to love unconditionally. While Michael Davis remained confined for the rest of his days, Emily's legacy in Brentwood persisted, demonstrating that kindness possesses the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Her life left an indelible impression on everyone touched by her story, proving that genuine compassion can transform pain into hope. On a quiet, snow-covered street in Springfield, January 2002, a chilling discovery cast a shadow over the town's peaceful facade. The day began like any other, with winter frost forming delicate patterns on windows and the muffled sounds of distant traffic beneath a blanket of fresh snow. However, early that morning, the serenity was shattered by a distressing call to the local police. A murder had occurred. The victim was Allison Hayes, a prominent figure in the community, known both for her successful business ventures and her generous philanthropic efforts. A devoted mother of two and a loving wife, she seemed to have it all. Her company, Hay Enterprises, had grown steadily over the past decade, making her one of Springfield's wealthiest and most influential residents. Yet, as investigators soon uncovered, beneath her polished exterior lay secrets hidden in the shadows. The call came at 6:45 a.m., when a neighbor reported seeing Allison's husband, Thomas Hayes, pacing anxiously outside their home. He appeared disheveled and visibly distressed, knocking on the door without success before beginning to shout for help. Concerned, the neighbor approached to assist. After several failed attempts to reach Allison, Thomas managed to force open the door, only to find her lifeless body sprawled in the kitchen, a pool of blood surrounding her. The scene was brutal. A single gunshot wound to the chest indicated a swift, fatal attack, with signs of a struggle evident in the disarray of the room. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to suspect that the perpetrator was someone familiar with the household. Thomas Hayes, visibly distraught, was quickly taken for questioning. He explained that he had returned home the previous evening from a business trip, arriving around 9 o'clock. Detective Robert Hayes, no relation to the victim, was assigned to the case. His initial impression was one of confusion, as the evidence pointed to a rapid, targeted killing. The absence of forced entry suggested the attacker might have been someone close to Allison. The struggle indicated she had attempted to defend herself, adding complexity to the investigation. As the inquiry unfolded, the town's peaceful veneer was forever altered by the tragic event, revealing the dark secrets that can lurk beneath even the most polished surfaces. According to him, the two had exchanged a brief conversation about their children and weekend plans before going to sleep. He insisted that nothing seemed unusual and that he had no reason to suspect anyone would want to harm his wife. However, Detective Hayes noticed inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. Despite appearing grief-stricken, Thomas's behavior seemed rehearsed, as if he was trying too hard to appear innocent. His responses were quick but lacked detail, and he avoided direct eye contact with the detective. He also appeared overly fixated on the circumstances of his wife's death, repeatedly asking how she had been found and what the cause of death was. This unusual focus raised the detective's suspicions. As the investigation progressed, Hayes delved into the lives of Thomas and Allison, revealing that their marriage was far from perfect. Interviews with friends, family, and colleagues painted a different picture from Thomas's portrayal of a loving husband. Rumors of infidelity surfaced, with several witnesses claiming Thomas had been involved with a younger woman named Laura Blackwell, a secretary at one of his company's branches. When questioned, Laura admitted to a romantic relationship with Thomas that had lasted about 6 months, but she insisted it had recently ended. She also stated she had no involvement in the couple's marital issues and had not seen or spoken to Thomas in several weeks. Further investigation uncovered that Thomas had been concealing more than an affair. Financial records showed he had been embezzling funds from Hayes Enterprises for months, transferring large sums into offshore accounts under false names. The stolen money was used to fund his luxurious lifestyle and to sustain his relationship with Laura Blackwell. Meanwhile, Allison had become increasingly suspicious of her husband's actions, especially after discovering that their financial situation was not as stable as Thomas had claimed. Her discovery of his financial misconduct led to heated arguments, and close friends noted she was devastated by the betrayal. She confided that she was considering divorce but had not yet made a final decision. The thought of losing their family business, their home, and their shared life was overwhelming for Thomas. Driven by greed and desperation to conceal his affair, Thomas's desire to preserve his lifestyle appeared to push him toward an unimaginable act. Hayes's investigation uncovered more incriminating evidence, including a hidden safe in the basement of the Hayes residence. Inside, authorities found documents detailing Thomas's illicit activities, further implicating him in the troubling circumstances surrounding his wife's death. Among the papers, investigators discovered a letter from a legal firm informing Allison that she had engaged them to initiate divorce proceedings. Dated just days before her death, this letter provided a crucial timeline, indicating she was on the verge of leaving her husband. The motive behind the tragedy became clear. Fearing the loss of his wealth and the collapse of his carefully constructed life, Thomas had decided to take drastic action. On a quiet early morning when Allison was alone and vulnerable, he carried out his plan. In a moment of cold calculation, he shot her. Her frantic attempt to defend herself in the kitchen was futile. Caught off guard by her husband's betrayal, her life was ended in a flash of terrifying violence. As evidence against Thomas grew, authorities swiftly moved to arrest him. On the night of January 23, 2002, just days after the incident, Thomas Hayes was taken into custody at his home. The community was stunned by the news. Friends and family, who once regarded Thomas as a successful and respectable man, found it hard to believe that someone they trusted could commit such an act. The small town of Springfield was deeply shaken by the revelation that the perpetrator was someone they knew personally. In the weeks leading up to the trial, Thomas's defense team argued that the murder was an accident. They claimed he was overwhelmed by emotional distress at the time, citing financial pressures and marital strain as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution remained firm, portraying Thomas as driven by greed, jealousy, and a fear of losing everything he had built. The meticulous planning and cold execution left little doubt in the minds of the jury. By late spring of 2002, after a highly publicized trial, Thomas Hayes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. The verdict offered some solace to Allison's loved ones, but the community's sense of security was forever altered. The murder of a prominent businesswoman by her own spouse shattered the trust that once held the town together. Allison's funeral was a somber event attended by friends, colleagues, and residents who knew her as a compassionate and generous woman. In her memory, a foundation was established to support women facing domestic violence and financial exploitation. Though her life was cut short by senseless violence, her legacy endured through the lives she touched and the lessons about the destructive power of greed and betrayal. For Detective Robert Hayes, this case remained unforgettable. It was a stark reminder of how deeply personal conflicts can escalate into tragedy, leaving lasting scars on a community and the people involved. The tragic events of that cold January morning in 2002 served as a stark reminder that even the most familiar faces can conceal the darkest secrets. Springfield, once a peaceful town, gradually began to heal after Thomas Hayes' conviction, yet the wounds from that brutal day remained fresh. The community, which had once thrived on simple, friendly interactions, was forever altered by the discovery of the crime and the shocking truths that emerged in its aftermath. Neighbors who had once exchanged warm smiles and casual waves now hesitated to engage, uncertain of what secrets might be hidden behind closed doors. The town's peaceful calm was shattered, replaced by a cautious vigilance that hadn't existed before. The most profound impact of Allison's loss was felt deeply by her children, Emily and Ryan, both in their late teens. They had been the pride and joy of their mother's life. Allison had been a caring, present mother, attending school events, helping with homework, and encouraging her children to pursue their dreams. Her absence left them adrift in a sea of grief and confusion. Emily, then a high school senior, was forced to mature rapidly, taking on responsibilities far beyond her years. Ryan, just a year younger, struggled to comprehend the betrayal of their father, Thomas, who had been arrested and taken away. For both, the hardest part was accepting that the man they had admired and trusted was responsible for such a heinous act. The emotional toll was intensified by the fact that they had never suspected anything amiss in their family life. Their world was suddenly turned upside down by an event they could never have anticipated. Emily, in particular, grappled with feelings of loneliness. Despite support from relatives and friends, she found it difficult to open up about her pain. Her close bond with her mother made the loss even more devastating, leaving a deep void in her heart. Meanwhile, the relentless media coverage and ongoing legal proceedings added layers of stress, pushing Emily further into withdrawal. She sought comfort in solitary walks along the river and quiet hours spent sifting through old family photographs, trying to hold on to memories of better times. Ryan responded to the tragedy with intense anger, reflecting his more volatile nature. His father's actions seemed to confirm his darkest fears about human nature, and he lashed out at those around him, classmates and even friends of his mother who tried to offer comfort. His raw, uncontrolled anger made those closest to him uneasy, fearing he might make choices leading him down a dangerous path. In a desperate effort to regain some sense of control, Emily and Ryan chose different ways to cope. With the support of her mother's friends and a compassionate school counselor, Emily began to channel her grief into constructive efforts, seeking to find meaning amid the chaos. Motivated by a desire to create a positive impact, she chose to pursue a career in social work, aiming to support children who faced similar hardships. To fulfill this goal, she volunteered with local organizations dedicated to assisting survivors of domestic violence, becoming an advocate for children in distress. Her dedication to helping others became a vital source of strength, providing her with a sense of purpose that helped her endure the pain of her own loss. In stark contrast, Ryan's path darkened as he grappled with intense feelings of betrayal and anger. His resentment toward his father and the world grew stronger as he matured. Despite his mother's efforts to keep him grounded, Ryan rebelled, dropping out of high school and slipping into a cycle of confrontations with law enforcement. He often drank heavily and used substances to numb the overwhelming sadness and frustration that consumed him. His family, once close-knit and hopeful, was shattered beyond repair, leaving deep scars. The investigation into Thomas Hayes was meticulous, with every aspect of his life scrutinized following his arrest. His trial became a widely covered event, drawing attention from both local and national media. The case highlighted the destructive effects of greed and the emotional toll of financial stress. Yet those who knew Thomas struggled to reconcile the man they had respected with the crimes he committed. He had been a respected businessman and a valued community member, making the revelations even more shocking. As the trial concluded, residents of Springfield continued to wrestle with the unsettling reality that they had been living near a man capable of such acts, unaware of his true nature. The discovery of his affair with Laura Blackwell shocked many, but it was the revelation of his embezzlement that truly stunned the town. Over years, it became evident that Thomas had led a double life, stealing enough money to sustain a luxurious lifestyle. However, the real issue was his sense of entitlement, the belief that he was above consequences, that he could do as he pleased without repercussions. As public attention shifted away from the case, Springfield began efforts to rebuild and move forward. Yet the memory of the tragedy remained vivid, leaving a lasting impact on those who had witnessed it. The event forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about the potential darkness lurking within seemingly ordinary lives. Today, Emily and Ryan, now adults, have each found their own ways to cope with the trauma of their childhood. Emily's work in social services offers her fulfillment and a renewed sense of purpose, even as she continues to feel the ache of losing her mother. The presence of her mother lingered in her thoughts, never truly fading. She often found herself contemplating Allison's life, pondering what might have been if her father had never taken her away. In her quest for comfort, she maintained contact with some of her mother's friends, those who had known Allison intimately. While Emily managed to move forward, the shadow of her mother's tragic death continued to cast a pall over her outlook on relationships and trust. Ryan, now in his late 20s, had made notable strides in overcoming his rebellious past. After periods of rehabilitation, he managed to turn his life around, securing work in construction. With the support of a counselor, he was learning to manage his anger in healthier ways. Yet, despite building a new life, he was often haunted by unanswered questions. Why had his father committed such an act? What drove Thomas to harm the woman he had vowed to love? These mysteries remained unresolved, lingering in his mind without clear answers. Meanwhile, Springfield had strived to move beyond the tragedy. The businesses once owned by Thomas Hayes were sold, and a foundation established in Allison's memory continued to grow, aiding many women in escaping abusive situations. Still, for those who knew the Hayes family, the question persisted. How could such a brutal act occur within their community? Though justice was ultimately served and Thomas Hayes was imprisoned for life, the town's fabric had been forever altered. Its residents learned a harsh lesson that even in seemingly perfect families, darkness can hide beneath the surface of deceit and violence. As they pressed on, Springfield's people were reminded that broken trust is difficult to mend, and the repercussions of one individual's actions can ripple through an entire community. Over time, the quiet streets gradually returned to normal, but the memories of Allison's murder remained vivid for those who had witnessed the tragedy firsthand. The case became a cautionary tale echoing through the town for years, leaving behind a legacy of suspicion and sorrow that affected not only the immediate family but the whole community. The trial of Thomas Hayes was a deeply emotional and intense ordeal. Residents watched as both sides presented their arguments. The defense portrayed Thomas as a man overwhelmed by financial struggles and a failing marriage, attempting to evoke sympathy by suggesting he acted in a moment of emotional distress. They argued that his actions, though extreme, stemmed from a mental breakdown caused by mounting pressures. Thomas Hayes faced a bleak future, fearing the imminent loss of everything he had built. Yet, the prosecution's case was irrefutable. They presented overwhelming evidence that Thomas had meticulously planned his wife's death. Financial records revealed embezzlement, a letter about an impending divorce surfaced, and testimonies from friends and relatives painted a clear picture. It was evident that Thomas hadn't acted on impulse, but had deliberately chosen to end his wife's life to protect his wealth and reputation. After days of deliberation, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder. In the courtroom, Emily and Ryan sat silently, overwhelmed by their emotions. While some closure was achieved, they understood that their lives had been forever changed. The actions of their father had shattered their world, leaving them to find ways to rebuild from the ruins he left behind. The trial marked only the start of a long, arduous journey toward healing for both of them. Emily channeled her grief into activism, dedicating herself to supporting victims of domestic violence. She volunteered extensively with organizations raising awareness about financial abuse and the dangers lurking in toxic relationships. Her efforts gave her a renewed sense of purpose, yet the pain persisted. Each time she helped someone escape an abusive situation, she was reminded of the betrayal and violence that had torn her family apart. Meanwhile, Ryan struggled with feelings of anger and confusion. Despite attempts to mend his relationship with his mother, resentment lingered. He blamed her for allowing their father's influence to dominate their lives and for not recognizing the warning signs. His frustration grew into inward anger, fueling his battles with addiction and straining his bond with his mother. Deep inside, he desperately wanted to break free from the destructive cycle that seemed to mirror his father's. Thomas Hayes' life in prison was a stark contrast to his former existence. His days behind bars were filled with constant reminders of his crime. Once a respected businessman admired by many, he now faced the reality of being a convicted offender. The betrayal of his family, especially his children, weighed heavily on him. He had lost everything: his wealth, his reputation, and most painfully, his family. His relationships with Emily and Ryan had been shattered beyond repair, and he understood that no amount of remorse could undo the damage he had caused. In prison, Thomas faced the harsh truth that no amount of remorse could undo the irreversible damage he had caused. Isolated from the general population because of the nature of his crime, he was often kept apart, viewed by others as a coward who had taken his wife's life. The whispers about his guilt followed him relentlessly, overshadowing his past achievements in business. Once admired for his acumen, he was now seen as little more than a villain. Much of his time was spent alone, contemplating the choices that had led him to that dark, unchangeable moment. In the silence of his cell, he recognized that his actions had not only ended his wife's life, but had also shattered the lives of their children, lives he could never restore. The repercussions of Allison's death extended beyond prison walls, stirring conversations about domestic violence, societal pressures, and the hidden struggles families often conceal. For many in Springfield, it was a stark reminder that even the most seemingly perfect families could harbor dark secrets. The Hayes family's tragedy became a somber lesson about the destructive nature of unchecked ambition, greed, and betrayal. In response, the community launched numerous initiatives aimed at supporting victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. Inspired by Allison's legacy, local organizations established foundations to help survivors, with her daughter Emily playing a pivotal role in raising awareness about financial exploitation and providing resources for vulnerable women. Though the pain of her loss remained, Emily found comfort in knowing her mother's influence persisted through the lives she had touched. Meanwhile, Ryan gradually began to rebuild his life. His journey was arduous, marked by setbacks and moments of doubt, but therapy and a supportive circle of friends helped him process the trauma he endured. Over time, Ryan learned to accept that his father's actions had profoundly affected him, and he started to reconcile with that reality. Though the grief of losing his mother lingered, he began to mend relationships within his family and even sought forgiveness. Thomas Hayes's deeds had shattered not only his wife's life, but also the foundations of everyone who depended on him. Yet, as the years passed, healing gradually took root among those most impacted. Emily and Ryan refused to let their past define their futures, reclaiming control over their lives despite the emotional hurdles. Springfield, too, started to recover, slowly healing the scars left by the tragedy. The community's focus shifted toward mutual support and creating a safer, more compassionate environment. The devastating event, once seen as an insurmountable rupture, ultimately became a reminder that even amid profound darkness, hope for redemption and renewal remains. In January of 2002, icy winds swept through the small town of Pinehurst, a place known for its peaceful streets and close-knit community. The residents, unprepared for the horror that would soon unfold, faced a chilling reality that would forever alter their sense of safety. It all began on the morning of January 15th, when local authorities received an urgent call around 7:45 a.m., signaling the start of a tragic chapter that would leave the town grappling with the aftermath of a devastating crime. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic and nearly unrecognizable amid the hysteria. It belonged to Margaret Blackwell, wife of George Blackwell, a prominent businessman and benefactor in Pinehurst. Her trembling words recounted a gruesome discovery in their family residence. Her husband was no longer alive. "He's dead. I found him in the study. There's so much blood," she sobbed. The dispatcher struggled to keep her calm and promptly sent officers to the Blackwell estate on Elm Street. For years, the Blackwell family had been esteemed pillars of the community, admired for their generosity and active participation in local charities. George Blackwell had amassed a considerable fortune through real estate ventures, while Margaret was regarded as a gracious, elegant woman who shared her husband's philanthropic spirit. When police arrived, they faced a chilling scene. George's lifeless body slumped in a chair within his grand study. His face bore signs of severe trauma, and a large pool of blood surrounded him. It was immediately evident that he had been struck multiple times with significant force, his head showing blunt force injuries. His once pristine clothing was soaked in blood, and his eyes remained wide open, frozen in shock and horror. Detective David Walker, an experienced investigator with the Pinehurst Police Department, was assigned to the case. He began a meticulous search of the house, noting that the rest of the family was absent. The children, Daniel and Sarah, were away at school, and Margaret, still in shock, sat in the living room, unable to provide any useful details. Her trembling hands betrayed her emotional state, clearly overwhelmed by the tragedy. Walker spoke with the officers who had arrived first, gathering initial information. Margaret claimed to have found her husband's body early that morning when she brought him his coffee, only to stumble upon the grisly scene. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry, which struck Walker as suspicious. If someone had entered the house to commit the act, they would have left traces, yet the house appeared undisturbed. The study was located at the rear of the large residence, a secluded area. As Walker examined each room, his mind raced through possibilities. Who could have been responsible, and what motive might they have had? Margaret was taken to the station for questioning, but her distress prevented her from recalling any relevant details about her husband's recent interactions or potential enemies. The investigation was just beginning, but the scene suggested a crime committed by someone familiar with the household, leaving many questions unanswered. Margaret, desperate to understand her husband's sudden death, could only shake her head in disbelief. She insisted that George was well-liked and had no known enemies. However, Detective Walker remained unconvinced. George Blackwell was a successful businessman whose ambitions likely attracted rivals and adversaries alike. Determined to uncover the truth, Walker delved into George's financial and business activities, seeking clues that might explain why someone would want him gone. As the investigation progressed over the following days, troubling details emerged. It appeared George had been entangled in several high-stakes real estate deals that had recently gone awry. He was involved in major projects, but mounting tensions had surfaced, especially concerning a controversial development that involved demolishing historic buildings downtown. This plan had sparked protests from local residents and business owners, some of whom publicly voiced their opposition. Among the most vocal critics was Daniel Rizzo, a businessman whose property was slated for destruction. Rizzo had accused George of dismissing the historical value of the buildings and disregarding the interests of small local enterprises. His protests had escalated to threats, though he had not been formally implicated in any violence. Still, his anger was well known, and Walker took note of his hostility. Further investigation led Walker to speak with individuals familiar with George. Some described him as a generous, community-minded man, while others depicted him as ruthless in business, willing to employ underhanded tactics to secure deals. There were whispers that George's success had come at the expense of others' well-being. The breakthrough came when Walker's team uncovered phone records revealing a series of brief calls from George to an unknown number just days before his death. Tracing the number led directly to Daniel Rizzo. This discovery marked a turning point in the case. Rizzo was summoned for questioning. He denied any involvement in George's death. Yet evidence continued to mount. Walker learned that George had threatened to reveal some of Rizzo's financial dealings, which could have jeopardized his business. Rizzo was facing a severe financial crisis, and losing his property would have been devastating. The tension between the two men had reached a critical point, hinting at a possible motive behind the tragedy. Faced with mounting evidence, Rizzo finally broke down and admitted his involvement in the death of George Blackwell. His account depicted a man driven to the brink by George's relentless tactics. Rizzo explained that he had gone to George's home on the morning of January 15th, intending only to discuss the demolition project. However, their conversation quickly turned into a heated dispute, and in a moment of uncontrollable anger, Rizzo struck George. The chaos that ensued led to the fatal blows, a tragic act fueled by months of mounting pressure and frustration that had finally erupted. Following his confession, Rizzo was taken into custody and charged with George's death. The small town of Pinehurst was left stunned as the revelation that the incident stemmed from a business conflict prompted many residents to question how far greed and ambition could influence a person's actions. The Blackwell family, already devastated by loss, now had to confront the uncomfortable truth about George's life, an acknowledgement that would linger painfully for years. Eventually, the case went to trial, and Rizzo was convicted of second-degree involvement in the death. Over time, the community gradually began to heal from the shock, and the Blackwell family found some solace in the fact that justice had been served, even if the full story cast a shadow over George's memory. His death, once seen as a tragic consequence of unchecked ambition and greed, became a stark reminder to Pinehurst residents of how fragile success could be and how far some might go to defend their interests. The trial of Daniel Rizzo drew widespread attention, transforming into a significant event for the town. The courtroom was packed with curious townspeople eager to understand how a prominent businessman could meet such a tragic end. For Margaret and her children, the proceedings marked another painful chapter in an already difficult journey. Over time, they learned that George's business dealings were far from innocent, but hearing the full extent of his actions from witnesses was a bitter revelation. Margaret sat quietly at the front, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, appearing diminished by recent events. The weight of the trial seemed to press heavily on her, and she had not anticipated that the man she once loved and trusted could be responsible for so much conflict. The life they had built together now appeared marred by deception. Rizzo's testimony, though hard to hear, confirmed her worst fears. George's legacy was not one of generosity or virtue, but of a man willing to trample others to preserve his wealth and status. The prosecution presented compelling evidence, and the town's residents listened closely, grappling with the complex truths that had come to light. The trial vividly depicted the final days of George Blackwell and the crucial role Daniel Rizzo played in his death. Prosecutors presented phone records revealing numerous calls between George and Rizzo before the incident, suggesting that George had been attempting to pressure Rizzo into compliance with his demands. These exchanges intensified the already strained relationship, hinting at a coercive dynamic. Conversely, the defense argued that Rizzo's actions were not premeditated but driven by a sudden, uncontrollable outburst. They claimed that Rizzo's behavior was the result of an emotional breakdown caused by the immense stress George had inflicted. As the proceedings advanced, more details emerged about George's dealings with Rizzo. Evidence indicated that George had threatened to expose Rizzo's financial instability unless he agreed to sell his property. The defense contended that Rizzo merely wanted to confront George about these demands, but the situation escalated when George, according to Rizzo's testimony, became aggressive and threatened to ruin his life. Rizzo's account was shaky, yet his emotional recounting of the confrontation revealed the depth of his distress. While he was driven by anger and fear, he never truly expected his actions to result in violence. Despite the defense's portrayal of the killing as an impulsive act, the evidence pointed to premeditation. Witnesses testified to Rizzo's increasingly erratic behavior in the days before the incident. He was seen visiting George's business repeatedly, attempting to negotiate and assert his demands. Rizzo was struggling with mounting debts that threatened his livelihood, and it appeared that his long-held frustrations finally overwhelmed him. His defense team argued that Rizzo was not a villain but a victim of circumstances, pushed to the edge by a ruthless businessman and his own financial hardships. They emphasized his troubled past and the immense pressure he faced, suggesting he had lost control. However, after hours of deliberation, the jury saw through this narrative. They recognized that, although Rizzo's actions stemmed from personal and professional stress, he consciously chose to resort to violence. He took the life of a man once prominent in the community, intending to put an end to their conflict. The verdict brought relief to many, but it could not undo the damage. Rizzo was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder, a charge reflecting both the anger that fueled his actions and the conscious decision to commit violence. The incident was not entirely planned in advance, which prevented the jury from reaching a unanimous verdict on first-degree murder. However, they concurred that Rizzo's actions stemmed from intense emotion and a desire to permanently silence George. Consequently, Rizzo received a sentence of 25 years behind bars, a punishment that many considered severe given his emotional breakdown, yet justified by the violent nature of the act. For the Blackwell family, however, this sentence offered little solace, as they grappled with the painful realization that George's death was not a random act of violence, but the result of a series of choices made by someone they had trusted. They were compelled to confront the uncomfortable truth that George's ambition and relentless drive had pushed him to a point where even his closest relationships could not withstand the pressure. In the weeks following the trial, the community of Pinehurst gradually began to recover. The shock caused by George Blackwell's passing had resonated throughout every part of town, prompting many residents to reevaluate their own values and priorities. Although George's reputation as a businessman had been damaged, his death ignited a broader discussion about the extremes people might go to in order to safeguard their financial interests and social standing. Conversations about personal pressures and community bonds grew more open, strengthening the sense of unity that had once defined Pinehurst. Margaret Blackwell, though devastated by her husband's loss, found a renewed sense of purpose in the aftermath. She dedicated herself to advocating for victims of financial exploitation, collaborating with local charities to raise awareness about the often unseen toll of manipulation on families. Her efforts allowed her to transform her grief into something meaningful, aiming to prevent others from suffering as her family had. While she knew she could never fully recover from George's absence, she was determined that his death would serve a purpose. Their children, Daniel and Sarah, also began to rebuild their lives despite the difficulties they faced. Sarah, deeply affected by her father's loss, threw herself into her studies and eventually pursued a career in social work, aiming to support others who had experienced trauma. Daniel, on the other hand, struggled with feelings of anger and confusion. Though not as close to George as Sarah had been, he recognized that his father's actions had triggered the tragedy. He sought counseling and gradually learned to process his pain, but the emotional scars persisted. For Rizzo, his prison sentence served as a stark reminder of the consequences of his choices. He spent his days contemplating the decision that had forever changed his life and the lives of many others. Despite finding some measure of peace, the weight of his actions remained with him, a constant reminder of the cost of unchecked emotion and impulsive decisions. In the aftermath of his journey through therapy and rehabilitation, he understood that the harm he had caused could never truly be erased. The weight of guilt over George Blackwell's death would stay with him for the rest of his life. The events surrounding Blackwell's murder in January of 2002 continued to cast a long shadow over Pinehurst, shaping the town's collective memory for many years. It was a tragedy that no one would soon forget, forcing the community to confront uncomfortable truths about ambition, greed, and the darker aspects of human nature. As Pinehurst gradually moved forward, it carried with it the memory of a man who had been deeply loved by many, yet whose actions had ultimately led to his untimely demise. Though scarred by the tragedy, the town slowly began to find a sense of normalcy again. The community had been shaken to its core, but over time residents gained a clearer understanding of the complex circumstances that had culminated in Blackwell's death. It was no longer seen as a random act of violence, but rather as the result of unchecked ambition, mounting personal pressures, and the desperate measures taken by a man determined to protect his livelihood. The murder forced Pinehurst's inhabitants to face the darker realities lurking beneath their seemingly idyllic suburban life. As years passed, the town evolved. Many who had once been unaware of the tensions between George Blackwell and local business figures began to reflect on the broader issues of power and greed that had shaped their community. Blackwell, once regarded as a benefactor, was now viewed through a more critical lens. His seemingly generous deeds were scrutinized, and some questioned whether his philanthropy was genuine or merely a facade to enhance his image. It appeared that his acts of charity might have been strategic moves to mask a more ruthless and calculating nature. Despite the heavy atmosphere of change, the Blackwell family remained an integral part of Pinehurst's social fabric. Margaret, forever changed by the events of that January, continued to serve as a force for good within the community. She transformed her personal tragedy into a platform for advocacy, speaking out on behalf of those who had suffered financial exploitation and abuse. Her experiences had shown her firsthand how wealth and power, when misused, could cause great harm. Her mission became ensuring that others would not endure the same suffering she had. Many in Pinehurst supported Margaret's efforts, including former associates of George Blackwell who, having uncovered the truth about his dealings, expressed deep regret and sought to make amends. Some of these individuals had once admired him, but now recognized the darker side of his pursuits. Others, however, remained silent, their complicity weighing heavily on their consciences. For Margaret, Her journey was not about seeking validation or forgiveness from others. It was about healing and making a difference, driven by a desire to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The pain of losing her husband never truly faded, yet her efforts to raise awareness about financial exploitation gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Sarah Blackwell eventually left Pinehurst to attend college and pursue a career in social work. Although the grief over her father's passing remained, she found comfort in helping others face their own hardships. Her personal experience with loss, combined with revelations about her father's complex life, inspired her to dedicate herself to mental health advocacy, recognizing that trauma's effects can linger for a lifetime. Her work centered on supporting those who had endured various forms of abuse, be it emotional, financial, or physical, and providing them with the resources to rebuild their lives. Daniel Blackwell, George's son, struggled more profoundly with the aftermath of the tragedy. While he had always been somewhat distant from his father, the murder intensified his feelings of grief, anger, and confusion. Initially, Daniel sought refuge in questioning why his father's life had ended so tragically, and why he had lived in a way that led to such a fate. Over time, however, he learned to cope by channeling his emotions into volunteering for causes aimed at at-risk youth and conflict resolution. His hope was that by helping others avoid the mistakes that had contributed to his father's downfall, he could find some measure of forgiveness for both George and himself. For Rizzo, life behind bars was both a punishment and a form of self-imposed penance. His remorse for his actions was evident, yet no amount of incarceration could undo the irreversible damage he had caused. Once a successful businessman, he had seen his life spiral into chaos after the incident. The burden of his deeds weighed heavily on him, prompting him to attend therapy, participate in anger management, and seek ways to reform himself. Despite his efforts, he understood that neither time nor change could bring George back or restore peace to the Blackwell family. Over the years, Rizzo grew more subdued, his rage replaced by profound sorrow. He recognized that the man he once was, driven by desperation, was gone, replaced by someone who could no longer ignore the consequences of his violence. Living with this knowledge, he carried the weight of having taken a life and forever altered those around him. The Blackwell family's life was irrevocably changed. They had to reconcile the image of George Blackwell, the man they had trusted and loved, with the reality of his private struggles. The contrast between the public persona and the hidden depths of his life forced them to confront difficult truths, shaping their future in ways they could never have anticipated. In many ways, the circumstances surrounding George Blackwell's passing revealed the depths of his complex personality. To some, he had been a kind and generous individual, yet to others he appeared cold, manipulative, and driven by self-interest. His death laid bare the contradictions within him, leaving his family to confront a new reality filled with grief and uncertainty. The tragedy of George Blackwell's demise served as a stark reminder to Pinehurst residents of the hidden darkness that can lurk behind even the most polished facades. It illustrated how ambition and the pursuit of power could ultimately devastate not only the victims, but also those who sought to attain or protect them. While the town gradually began to heal, the weight of this event lingered, forever etched into its history as a testament to the complexities of human nature. The incident exposed the fragile balance between outward success and inner turmoil, revealing how greed and anger could lead to destructive outcomes. Over time, Pinehurst grew quieter, but the memory of the Blackwell case persisted, serving as a poignant lesson that appearances can be deceiving and that moral integrity is often tested in moments of crisis. The tragedy marked a turning point for the community, which learned that no individual, regardless of their status or admiration, was immune to life's pressures. The choices made in those critical moments carried consequences that could ripple far beyond the immediate. The legacies of George Blackwell and Daniel Rizzo remained indelibly linked to that winter morning, shaping the town's understanding of ambition, morality, and human vulnerability. Pinehurst was forever changed, yet it moved forward, striving to embrace both success and ethical values. The Blackwell incident became a somber lesson, a reminder that even the brightest achievements can be shadowed by darker forces, and that true strength lies in integrity and compassion. Meanwhile, in the cold winter of January 2002, Brooklyn, New York was shaken by the sudden death of Vincent Harris, a prominent community figure and successful businessman. Known for his philanthropy and extensive connections within the real estate sector, Vincent's passing uncovered a tangled web of deception, betrayal, and hidden secrets that would leave the city stunned for months. It all began on a particularly frigid evening when Vincent, aged 45, was found dead in his luxurious penthouse apartment downtown. A self-made millionaire, Vincent had risen from a modest background in Queens through relentless effort, sharp business instincts, and a talent for forging influential relationships. Despite his achievements, he had accumulated enemies along the way, many of whom he had outmaneuvered in high-stakes deals, leaving some financially devastated. His reputation for ruthless negotiations often pushed others to their limits, yet he maintained a public image as a generous philanthropist, supporting local charities, youth programs, and scholarships for underprivileged students. To most in Brooklyn, Vincent Harris appeared to embody success, wealth, influence, and respect. However, on the evening of January 15th, 2002, everything changed. His assistant, Claire Thompson, arrived at his apartment around 7 o'clock that evening, only to find that his life had been abruptly and tragically cut short. When she arrived for a scheduled meeting, she found Vincent Harris's office door slightly ajar. Inside, she was met with a scene of stark horror. Vincent was slumped over his desk, lifeless, with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. His spacious office, decorated with expensive furniture and artwork, showed no signs of a struggle or forced entry, indicating a carefully executed act. Immediate action was taken, and she called emergency services, but by the time authorities arrived, it was already too late. Detective Michael Carter, a veteran investigator with the Brooklyn Police Department, was assigned to the case. Having handled numerous violent incidents, he found Vincent's death unusual. The precise, clean nature of the act, combined with the absence of robbery or forced entry, suggested a targeted attack. Vincent's prominence and extensive connections complicated matters further, hinting that this was no ordinary case. The investigation started with standard interviews of family, friends, and colleagues. Vincent's estranged wife, Amanda Harris, was the first to be questioned. Their marriage had ended nearly 2 years earlier amid bitter disputes, and despite their separation, Amanda appeared visibly shaken by his death. She insisted their relationship had been over long ago and claimed she had no knowledge of anyone who might wish Vincent harm. She also reported not having seen him in weeks and denied any threats or confrontations. In contrast, Vincent's business associates painted a different picture. They described him as a man who had made numerous enemies, especially within the real estate sector. Over the years, Vincent had acquired multiple properties, often outbidding smaller developers or employing aggressive tactics to secure lucrative deals. One of his most contentious disputes involved Richard Carmichael, a former partner turned rival, who had clashed with Vincent over a luxury residential project in downtown Brooklyn. After Vincent withdrew from the deal, Carmichael suffered significant financial losses, fueling tensions between them. Detective Carter turned his attention to Carmichael, known for holding grudges and employing underhanded methods. However, after questioning him, the detective found no concrete evidence linking Carmichael to the murder. Carmichael had an alibi for the night of the incident, and his lawyer emphasized the lack of any motive. Yet Carter remained cautious, sensing there was more beneath the surface. As days went by, the investigation grew more personal. Claire Thompson, Vincent's assistant, who had discovered his body, became a key figure in the inquiry. She was among the few who knew Vincent well and could potentially hold vital clues. In recent months, the presence of a young woman near Vincent's residence and her proximity to the crime scene aroused suspicion. Claire, in her late 20s, had worked for Vincent for over 3 years. Known for her efficiency, loyalty, and quiet demeanor, she maintained a reputation as a dependable employee. However, during her interview with Detective Carter, she appeared visibly nervous, and her answers to certain questions seemed evasive. She claimed to have been working late at the office when she discovered Vincent's body, asserting she had seen no one else in the building that evening. Determined to uncover the truth, Carter delved into Claire's background and uncovered surprising details. It turned out she had once been involved in a brief romantic relationship with Vincent, a fact she had not disclosed initially. Their relationship had ended bitterly, with Vincent ending things abruptly after learning Claire had been seeing another man simultaneously. Vincent was known for his vindictive streak, especially in personal matters, which added tension to their breakup. Claire was deeply affected by the split and had even filed a temporary restraining order against Vincent. Further investigation revealed that Claire's motives were far from innocent. She was heavily in debt and struggling with a gambling addiction that had worsened in recent months. Witnesses confirmed she had been seen at several high-stakes poker games, risking large sums in hopes of recovering her losses. Her financial difficulties had been kept secret, but her debts continued to grow, leaving her with few options. Piecing together these clues, Carter uncovered a disturbing motive for the crime. Claire had visited Vincent's apartment that night under the pretense of discussing work, but her real intention was robbery. When Vincent refused to hand over money, a violent confrontation ensued. In a fit of rage, Claire shot him, then staged the scene to resemble a professional hit. Her plan nearly succeeded until police traced her movements that evening. Surveillance footage from a nearby building showed her leaving the scene just minutes after the shooting. With mounting evidence, Claire was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During the trial, prosecutors argued she had meticulously planned the killing to escape her mounting financial troubles. The defense contended the shooting was a crime of passion, driven by a heated argument that spiraled out of control. Despite these arguments, the jury convicted Claire Thompson of first-degree murder, sentencing her to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. The murder of Vincent Harris shocked the Brooklyn community, leaving a trail of grief and disbelief. It was a tragic event that underscored how desperation and unresolved conflicts can lead to devastating consequences. The story uncovered a darker side behind what once seemed a flawless life. Vincent's reputation as a generous benefactor and successful businessman was forever marred by the revelation of his complicated personal ties and the enemies he had accumulated over the years. His downfall served as a stark reminder of how despair and concealed secrets can push individuals toward actions they might never have considered. For Claire Thompson, her life was irrevocably altered. Once a loyal assistant to Vincent Harris, she now faced the consequences of her choices behind bars, paying a heavy price for the tragic outcome of her involvement. In the weeks following Vincent's death, Brooklyn was gripped by shock as news of his passing sent ripples through the community. As more details emerged about his life, the darker aspects of his character and the corruption surrounding him came into focus, revealing not only ruthless business dealings but also a tangled web of complex relationships. The involvement of Claire Thompson in the crime shocked many, as she had been perceived as a quiet professional figure with no apparent motives. The media coverage intensified as her trial began, transforming her story into a public spectacle that drew crowds from both Brooklyn and beyond. Once seen as timid and reserved, Claire's case became a stark illustration of how hidden financial struggles and emotional turmoil can lead to tragedy. During the trial, evidence of her mounting debts and gambling habits surfaced. Witnesses testified about her increasing financial desperation, including loans from dubious lenders that plunged her deeper into debt. Her former boyfriend, who had been part of her life briefly before their separation, took the stand to describe her growing obsession with money and her emotional instability. It became clear that the woman who once worked diligently in Vincent's company was now driven by a desperate need to resolve her financial woes, even at the cost of her morality. The prosecution painted a picture of Claire as a woman willing to commit drastic acts to escape her financial difficulties. Her troubled past, including her gambling addiction and her obsession with maintaining a facade of wealth, was laid bare. Vincent, once trusting, had become increasingly wary of her behavior, confiding in colleagues about his suspicions that she was hiding something. Yet no one could have foreseen that the loyal assistant would turn against him in such a brutal manner. Meanwhile, the defense sought to portray Claire as a victim of circumstance, emphasizing her emotional struggles and financial pressures that had pushed her to the brink. The case became a gripping narrative of betrayal, desperation, and the tragic consequences of hidden secrets. Caught in the grip of severe financial hardship and emotional distress, Claire Thompson found herself embroiled in a tragic series of events. The defense argued that her actions were driven by passion rather than premeditation, suggesting that her involvement in Vincent's death was impulsive, a desperate attempt during a heated argument to pressure him into providing the money she desperately needed. Their strategy aimed to diminish her culpability by casting doubt on her intent, portraying her as acting in a moment of rage rather than with prior planning. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence that painted a different picture. Forensic analysis revealed that Vincent's death was not the result of a spontaneous act, but a calculated attack. Claire had fired a single shot into his back, with no signs of struggle, indicating a deliberate and targeted effort. After the shooting, she meticulously staged the scene to resemble a professional hit, removing any traces of her involvement. Surveillance footage confirmed her movements, showing her leaving the scene shortly after the crime, further undermining her claims of impulsiveness. Her careful planning was driven by a desire to escape with the money she believed she deserved, but her deception unraveled quickly. The investigation traced her steps, exposing her lies and revealing her intent to conceal her role in the murder. As the trial drew to a close, the overwhelming evidence made her guilt undeniable. Vincent's family, who had supported her for years, felt betrayed and devastated. His brother, Michael Harris, delivered an emotional statement recounting the trust they had placed in Claire and expressing profound grief over the loss of his brother. His voice trembled as he described the deep sense of betrayal from someone once considered a confidant. Despite the emotional toll, the jury's verdict was clear. Claire Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, emphasized the cold, calculated nature of her crime. He expressed no sympathy for her financial struggles, highlighting how her deliberate actions had resulted in an innocent life lost. Disappointed but resolute, her legal team immediately filed an appeal, claiming a miscarriage of justice. The community's response was one of relief, affirming that justice had been served. The case continued to resonate within Brooklyn, exposing the darkness that can lurk beneath a seemingly successful life. It served as a stark reminder that appearances can deceive, and that beneath wealth and ambition, despair can drive individuals toward destructive paths. While Claire's conviction brought some closure, it did little to heal the wounds inflicted by Vincent's loss, leaving a lasting impact on all involved. The loss of Vincent Harris profoundly affected his family, and despite their pursuit of justice, they could not erase the emotional scars left by the tragedy. Once viewing their father as a hero and a guiding figure, his children faced the harsh reality that he had been taken by someone he had trusted. Their grief was compounded not only by the absence of their father, but also by the painful knowledge that someone close to their family had ended his life. Vincent's death ignited a broader conversation about the intense pressures of success and the lengths some might go to preserve their wealth and status. For Brooklyn residents, it served as a stark reminder that even those seemingly at the top could be driven by greed, desperation, or inner turmoil. The case left a lasting imprint on the community, and the memory of Vincent's tragic passing would resonate for years. Meanwhile, Claire Thompson's fate was equally tragic. Sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Once a young woman full of potential, she was now just another figure caught in the machinery of the justice system. Her hopes of financial gain from Vincent's death had vanished, leaving her to lose her freedom, reputation, and the trust of those who once relied on her. Behind cold prison walls, Claire had ample time to reflect on her choices, yet no remorse could undo the life she had taken or the damage inflicted. Vincent Harris's murder was a tragedy not only for his family, but for the entire community that had once seen him as a hero. For Claire, her future was now confined within the darkness of incarceration, where the repercussions of her actions would shadow her for the rest of her days. Over time, the shock of Vincent Harris's death gradually faded into the collective memory of Brooklyn, but its ripple effects persisted. The impact of his loss continued to influence those closest to him and even those connected to Claire Thompson. Even years after her sentencing, public interest in the case endured, and the story's influence continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Vincent's family, though they found some measure of closure through Claire's conviction, remained haunted by the void left by his absence. Michael Harris, Vincent's older brother, who had delivered a heartfelt statement during the trial, struggled to accept the reality of his brother's death. The Harris family's grief was intensified by the betrayal of someone they had trusted and welcomed into their lives. Vincent's children, still teenagers at the time, grew up carrying the weight of this loss, forever shaped by the tragedy that had forever altered their lives. Despite the shadow cast by their father's tragic passing, his children struggled to move forward, yet the memory of his absence persisted. They often spoke about him in interviews, acknowledging the void his loss had created in their lives, while also harboring deep resentment toward the woman responsible for taking him away. The media coverage surrounding the case remained intense for years, with countless articles, documentaries, and podcasts delving into the motives behind Claire's actions and exploring Vincent Harris's life. His story became a symbol of the darker aspects of ambition, how the relentless pursuit of success, wealth, and the willingness to betray those closest could lead to devastating outcomes. Vincent Harris had enjoyed a career marked by business achievements, public admiration, and charitable endeavors. Beneath this polished exterior, however, lay a history of ruthless dealings and strained personal relationships. These revelations kept the case in the public eye, making it difficult for many to forget the tragic events. Claire Thompson's life behind bars was equally arduous, mirroring the difficulties of her trial. After her conviction, she spent several years in solitary confinement, a measure intended to shield her from other inmates who might view her as a high-profile prisoner. She was treated as a pariah, her crime perceived as particularly heinous due to the violent manner of her betrayal and the brutal execution of her former employer. The prison system gradually eroded her remaining dignity, and Claire became increasingly isolated from the outside world. Over time, signs of profound psychological trauma appeared. Initially, she maintained a defiant stance, insisting her actions stemmed from desperation rather than premeditation. But as years passed, she expressed remorse, and her cell walls reflected her inner turmoil. She began writing letters to the Harris family, apologizing for her role in Vincent's death, though she never received a reply. When she attempted a public apology through the media, her words were met with silence. Vincent's family, still mourning their loss, had no desire to hear from the woman who had taken him from them. Despite her label as a murderer, some of her former colleagues from Vincent's company believed her circumstances played a significant role in her actions. They pointed out her personal struggles, gambling addiction, and financial difficulties that had spiraled out of control, ultimately leading her to make a tragic choice. They felt that under different circumstances, Claire might have turned her life around. However, such opinions were in the minority. The dominant narrative painted her as a calculating traitor, driven by greed and betrayal, with little room for doubt about her culpability. Vincent Harris's death marked a tragic turning point, a moment of irrevocable loss that many could not undo. Over time, his memory gradually faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer stories and scandals. Yet, for those who had known him personally, his passing remained a profound chapter in their lives. Several of his business partners, many of whom had profited from his investments, began to distance themselves publicly from his legacy, some even attempting to capitalize on his absence by taking control of projects he had left behind. Their efforts focused on restoring the relationships Vincent had once carefully nurtured within the real estate industry. His death served as a stark warning about the perils of unchecked ambition, exposing the brutal realities of the business world and the potential for betrayal lurking beneath a surface of success. Many of his associates, who once regarded him as a mentor, started to question their own ethical choices, reevaluating their pursuits in light of his tragic end. Some came to see Vincent as a cautionary figure, someone whose relentless drive had led him into dangerous territory, leaving him vulnerable to betrayal even by those closest to him. For Claire Thompson, the years spent in prison were filled with ongoing reflection. She sought help through various rehabilitation programs, working to address her mental health and addiction struggles. However, her journey towards redemption remained uncertain, as the trauma of her actions was not easily erased. Her attempts to engage in prison outreach initiatives, aiming to transform her story into one of reform, yielded mixed results. While some inmates viewed her as a figure from whom lessons could be learned, others could not forgive the brutality of her crime. Over time, Claire displayed deep remorse for her past, yet that regret could never undo the life she had taken. Vincent's death profoundly impacted his family, colleagues, and the community that once admired him. The layers of deception, betrayal, and financial desperation that led to his murder became part of Brooklyn's history, a grim reminder of how greed and ambition can distort judgment and steer individuals onto dark paths. Ultimately, Claire Thompson's story was one of tragedy rather than redemption. Her life, like Vincent's, was forever altered by the choices they made, with consequences that would follow them for the rest of their days. For those who knew Vincent Harris, the weight of his absence remains an enduring burden. They continue to carry the memory of his sudden, violent end, never fully able to move beyond the shock and loss that defined his final moments.